Hello, I'm Brad Kelly, and you're listening to Method and Madness. This is a show about books, the people who write them, and the labyrinth to be explored between the words.
Have you ever heard about Willie the Weeper? Had a job as a chimney sweeper. He had the dope habit and he had his bad. Listen while I tell you about a dream.
In a minute, he appeared, carrying something heavy draped in a white towel. He put it carefully on the center of the table. Then he paused, made sure I was looking, before gravely he removed the cloth. It was a stone head. Whether of a man or a woman, it was difficult to say. The nose had been broken short. The hair was done in a fillet with two side pieces, but the power of the fragment was in the face. It was set in a triumphant smile, a smile that would have been smug if it had not been so full of the purest metaphysical good humor. The eyes were faintly oriental, long, and as I saw, for Conscious put a hand over the mouth, also smiling. The mouth was beautifully modeled, timelessly intelligent, and timelessly amused. That is the truth, not the hammer and sickle, not the stars and stripe, not the cross, not the sun, not gold, not yin and yang, but the smile. It's Socratic, isn't it? Never mind what it is. Look at it. Look into its eyes. He was right. The little sunlit thing had some numen, or not so much a divinity as a having known divinity in it, of being ultimately certain. But as I looked, I began to feel something else. There's something implacable in that smile. Implacable? He came behind my chair and looked down over my head. It is the truth. Truth is implacable, but the nature and meaning of this truth is not. Tell me where it came from. From Didyma in Asia Minor. How old is it? The 6th or 7th century before Christ. He sat on the parapet, his arms folded. I wonder if it would have had that smile if it knew of Auschwitz. Because they died, we know we still live. Because a star explodes and 1,000 worlds like ours die, we know this world is. That is the smile. That what might not be, is. A long silence. Then he said, "When I die, I shall have this by my bedside. It is the last face I want to see." The little head watched our watching, bland, certain, and almost maliciously inscrutable. It flashed on me that it was also the smile that Conscious sometimes wore, as if he sat before the head and practiced. At the same time, I realized exactly what I disliked about it. It was above all the smile of dramatic irony, of those who have privileged information. I looked back up at Conscious's face, and I knew I was right. Today we are talking The Magus by John Fowles, and to help me in this endeavor, I've got the great Alex Constantin from the podcast if you should be listening to. I don't know why you're not if you're not listening to it, but the Black Ibis Social Club, big time Substacker, my Substack role model. Alex, thanks for joining me. Thanks for agreeing to do this, and thanks for your time. I really do appreciate it. I think this is going to be fun.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for having me on. I've been looking forward to this, to talk about this author for forever now, because John Fowles is one of my favorite 20th century authors. So I've been looking forward to this one for a while.
Yeah, it's, as I was kind of concocting the coming months for this show and the books I want to do, I've got kind of a long list, and most of them will eventually make it, but it's about finding the right guest and finding the right time, and I've been thinking about it. It's a book I'd never read, and then I feel like I saw you post something about it, about how much you liked this book, and I was like, okay, that's the sign. We'll find a space on the schedule to talk this, and I'll bring on the man himself to talk about it. Before we get in too deep, I'm just gonna do like a little read a little 2-minute thing I wrote about the Magus, just in case it's a book you haven't read, or maybe you haven't read in a long time. Just a quick primer to kind of set you in time and place, and what the hell is this book? And I'll try not to give. This is actually. Of the books I've talked about so far on this show, this is probably the one that you can spoil the most in terms of like if you've never read it and you know too much about what happens sort of in the back half, it does kind of screw up the reading experience. And so I don't know. I don't know what we're gonna do about that. I think we just spoil it, to be honest.
I guess we can talk in vague terms and stuff.
Yeah, about
It's
some
the
of
journey.
it. It is about the journey. Yeah. But there's so many sort of twists and turns, and then sort of like, oh, I thought it was going this way and it went that way, and new information that makes previous parts cast a whole new light on previous parts. So it's one of the joys of reading it for sure. But anyway, let me just read this. So The Magus by John Fowles was published in 1965. It was his second publication after The Collector, but it was actually the first novel that he wrote. John Fowles, and we're going to do a little bit of, I think, talk a little bit more about his life, but just quickly, he was an Englishman born in 1926, was educated at Oxford. His time as a teacher of English at a school on the Greek island of Spetses, I'm probably not saying that correctly, provided the inspiration for the fictional island of Phraxos in this book, The Magus, and some of the circumstantial and atmospheric aspects of the book. Other books written by Fowles include The French Lieutenant's Woman, and I thought I had it here. There's one that's the Ebony something. Alex? Ebony Tower. Yeah, that's right.
It's a short story collection, actually.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to get that. I'm gonna have to get around to that book at some point because I enjoyed this book so much. His major works are interestingly referred to as postmodern novels, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about that. Is that even a label that makes sense here? I have mixed feelings about that, but he's probably best understood as a middle ground, sort of stylistic middle ground between the sort of modernist works of the generation prior and then the works by people like J.G. Ballard, who were of his same generation, but feel sort of maybe. Well, we can get into that, perhaps. This book, The Magus, is something of a 20th century bildungsroman, following a year or two in the life of Nicholas Earth, a self-important and at times pretentious young failed poet who is living out a kind of Byronic arc of borderline womanizing as a young man in England. He's later described in the book as, quote, semi-intellectual, which I thought was pretty funny, and who, despite his deep flaws, is something of an everyman for well-educated young men everywhere who are just attractive and charismatic enough to avoid becoming incels. He meets a young Australian woman and begins a brief affair that is interrupted when he takes a job teaching at the Lord Byron School for Boys on the island of Phraxos. Pretty decent gig, but he soon finds that the island, while stunningly beautiful to look at, leaves much to be desired in terms of diversions, especially for a young man. He was warned to avoid a certain man on the island who supposedly collaborated with the Germans during World War II. And the book is set in 1953, so World War II is, it's often relevant, but it's, there's people around who remember it in 1953 for sure. He's told to avoid the waiting room, but of course he cannot help himself and soon finds himself at the villa of an eccentric man named Maurice Conscious, the primary candidate for the Magus of the title. Conscious is a 60-something doctor of independent means with a stunning villa housing surprising works of art. He extends a very hospitable hand to young Nicholas, and despite his efforts to seclude himself from the rest of the happenings on the island. Shortly after meeting him, Nicholas is led into the role of the central character in an elaborate piece of living theater that ultimately forces him to question the very nature of his reality. So that just kind of scratches the surface, sort of basically what's going on in this book, but I've pretty much just led you up to, say, page 70 or something, and it's a big book. Alex, since I kind of reached out to you to do this because I know about your enthusiasm for this book, maybe you can tell me, maybe we start with sort of where did you read this? When did you read this in your life? Maybe even why you read it, what it meant to you. What's your relationship to this book?
That's actually interesting because I read this book, I would say maybe Sorry, I had to cough. Maybe like 5 years ago now.
Oh,
And I was actually living my Nicholas Orff kind of act. It was in the middle of the COVID nonsense, and I had a job very similar to Nicholas in the book, where I was working on a remote island, but in my case, it was in the middle of the Pacific, and I wasn't teaching, but I was doing medical instead. And I read it at the same time I was watching True Detective season 1 for like the 50th time, right?
Right.
So this book is very much interlinked with True Detective season 1 for me, and I think there's a lot of interesting similarities. It can be put in the same category. I think that if you like that show, you will also like this book. It kind of has a lot of the craziness kind of going on that show does, where is it real? Is it not real? Is there supernatural? Right. There is not supernatural. It's also very much linked in my mind to Umberto Eco's Foucault's Pendulum, which is another novel along the same kind of lines of, is it real? Is it not real? Is, this kind of madness and mystery where you start doubting yourself, whether it's like a supernatural element or just people kind of messing with you or that type of thing. But I came across it. I was really interested in reading postmodern fiction specifically, but I was really into the idea of reading like massive novels along the lines of Foucault's Pendulum, because I was like, that was the kind of mood I was in, and I think it came up on a recommendation from a friend, and I started it, and I was like, oh, okay, I love this book. I think I read it in like 2 days straight. I just recently reread it like in the last 4 days because I love it. I've read it 3 times already.
Yeah,
but it's just such it's a book that I can see people liking and loving. People that like I've given it to like love it specifically, and some people I've come across, either if people that don't like it will not finish it. You know what I mean? It tends to be a book that like there's a DNF threshold that some people reach and go, no, I don't like this. And even if you look online at some of the reviews, I did that earlier today trying to see what people thought about it. There's a lot of people that just don't get it. I think you have to have a certain mindset or a certain attraction towards really esoteric, kind of out there literary type stuff. I was listening to the Bret Easton Ellis podcast, and he read it like last year for the first time, and he really liked it. And he mentioned it a few times on his podcast. He said he read it through and through. And there's a lot of, the first person narrative, the kind of shifty weirdness of Bret Easton Ellis's most recent book. I can see a lot of that coming from this type of fiction. I don't know if you might agree with me. What's very interesting is this book it's a piece of middlebrow fiction, right? And that's a term that I don't think we use as much anymore. Like, what does middlebrow mean? Mostly because all our contemporary modern fiction you buy at Barnes and Noble is just lowbrow. Everything's just lowbrow. It's just dragons having sex with dragons or whatever. That's what our literary life is like. Or like, girls walking around New York City. It's just it's all lowbrow. It's middlebrow because in a way, you could say it's an airport book. I could see it in 1965 or 1966 being sold in the airport, right?
Yeah,
but when you read it, it is definitely not a book for dumbasses and by any means, because you can read it from beginning to end on a very surface level, and it's an interesting mystery with some kind of twists or whatever. But there's so many layers to the book itself. You have to really grasp it. You have to have a somewhat decent familiarity. Well, John Fowles himself is an Oxford guy, and you can see that he wrote, and there's tons of references to Shakespeare, to ancient Greece. There's lots of Latin that kind of used throughout it, and the ending itself in one of the editions is given away through a Latin phrase, there's references to French literature that if you're not familiar with, you just don't get it. There's references to like early modern kind of war of religion type stuff in there. And a lot of that stuff you're going to miss if you're not familiar. And anybody that reads books from the early 20th century or even the mid 20th century, like this one, and you look at these books and you're like, oh, wow, this is written for like your average person. It just kind of illustrates how far our education system has collapsed, you know, like because people just don't have any understanding of any of this stuff that would have been common for most people that have a college education.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and it's yeah, the middle brow. I think that's right, and I don't mean it as any kind of dismissal either. I think there's, and why is it that? I mean, I think partially it's that because it's the sort of driving engine to it is sort of a mystery, right? It's sort of like a who. I don't even want to say well, the sort of last 100 pages is kind of a whodunit because Irf is trying to figure out what just happened to him, and he's going through almost like detective-like steps to sort of unravel the mystery, right? But there is something very like it's middlebrow in this sense. I could see this being a Netflix limited series, and that's not dismissing it. I think you could make it a very good Netflix limited series, right? With great setup shots of a beautiful Greek island. It's kind of sexy. It's alluring. I think I kind of like that. I mean, I also enjoyed the heck out of it. It's
right.
It's super fun. It's super fun, and it isn't. And you're right. There are references in there that require, at least some contact points with sort of like the literary tradition or folklore or mythology, or what's more than that, at least there's a thing, maybe you've noticed this too, where it's like, I'm not going to tell you that I, on first glance, immediately made connection to every single reference in here, right? But I think I'm pretty comfortable with getting context to give me a sense of what they generally are, or looking them up, and or just having enough knowledge of, I can, when somebody drops a Shakespeare line, I don't necessarily know what character said it or what play it was from, but I can kind of tell that it's a Shakespeare line. You know what I mean?
Right.
So there's a certain level of comfort I think you can have with that. And I think some people out there in the world, maybe that's process is a little overwhelming. Like if there's too many things they feel like they don't understand accumulating, it's a turnoff for them. And I'm kind of cool with that. I don't mind, reading a few pages where I don't really know what just happened or what they're talking about. I'm cool with wading through that process. So, yeah.
Right. I mean, I'm a personal believer that, like, if I understand it too well the first time, I'm like, it's probably too easy for me. I get a pleasure. And this is not like out of arrogance or anything like that. I get a pleasure out of going, what is he talking about here? And then taking the time to, Google it or, open another book. And then, because I found out that's how I discover other books, that's how I'm like, he's talking about this. So I'm going to hop onto this book and read it next and to see where this came from and stuff. I think, and I've said it before on Black Ibis podcast, and whenever we have authors on, it's like, I think that as a contemporary author, your goal should be to write a novel that is unfilmable, right? Because why film is a fantastic medium for art, but it's its own medium. And why would you, if you're going to write a movie, well, just go ahead and write a movie. If you want to, you know what I mean? If you want to, if your goal to when you're writing is to write for a movie, well, just make a movie, dude. Go buy a camera and make a movie. You can deal with all the technology to make a great movie with high, excellent visuals and stuff exists right now. It's pretty cheap. I mean, just like we're doing this podcast right now, make your freaking movie with a few $1,000s. So when I write, my goal is to always write the unfilmable. Now, interestingly enough, somebody did make this into a movie, and it sucked because it's an internal monologue. I don't know who thought it would have made a great movie, but it would make a great. You're right. It would make a great like HBO show, like like
Yeah,
White
have
Lotus or something like that.
yeah, you have to give it like 6 or 8 hours at least to kind of
Right.
let it go at its pace. But yeah, I think it's got all the elements there that you might want to make it turn into a good
You
film.
know, to go back to HBO shows and True Detective, and where I think the comparison comes in best, for me at least, is one of the reasons I like True Detective is that I can put it on with a bunch of friends that are, let's say, maybe not the most well-read, not the thinking types, your natty ice kind of drinkers. Or
Right, right.
right? And those guys can watch 8 episodes of a pretty awesome detective show with a lot of, decent amount of violence and shooting and excitement and stuff. But then if you're, a weirdo, esoteric guy into tarot cards and, that kind of stuff, then you'll get the layers that are underneath that show, the whole King in Yellow stuff, the references to, nihilism, post-existentialist kind of ideas, weird occult stuff that come from W. Chambers, and, all that kind of stuff is hidden in the show, in the corners. And I feel like, in a way, that's how this book is. You can read it as a airport novel that's maybe a little bit more literary than, well, it's a lot more literary than your average like Stephen King novel, for example, or your average novel out today. But it's still a mystery with weird stuff and a lot of sex, right? Because there's a lot of sex in it. Mm-hmm. It's pretty risque for 1965, I think, in my opinion. Especially towards the end. And then, but if you're into the deeper literary kind of analysis, there's some good depth to it without it being like academic or stodgy or anything like that. So that's one of the main reasons I love it. My favorite novels tend to fit into that kind of category. Another one I truly enjoy along the same lines, like I said, Umberto Eco stuff, or what is the Secret History is another one where it's kind of
Donna Tartt.
Donna Tartt's, right? Yeah. It's kind of a novel about, guys in college, kind of sleeping with each other, but there's this deeper kind of, ancient Greek kind of exploration of, inner rage and like the will of man and that kind of stuff hidden underneath it. And to really get it, you have to kind of know the references that they're bringing up in these scenes, right? And that's just kind of what John Fowles does with this. But that's why I love it.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love the concept, the idea of a practice. Well, first of all, the thing you were saying about writing the book, that it's funny, literally the last conversation I had on this podcast, we talked about that too. It's sort of like, like we got to stop trying to write movies as books. Just write a book if that's what you're going to do. And I think that's a good discipline. And that doesn't mean you don't occasionally write a scene that could be filmable or something, but I think that's a good thing to keep in mind. Of like, I'm not writing a movie, I'm writing a book. And I think that's one of the things that might help novels kind of survive, because they'll be doing something that isn't done elsewhere. And I do love this idea of the book having these sort of multiple layers. There's a layer that you can just read it and you can just sort of say, that conscious guy is kind of crazy, huh? Or or you can actually sort of get into this character and think, try to run through some of the thought experiments that kind of spur off the things that he's saying. As I was reading it, I was thinking in my mind that, for me, I think the closest comparison to a writer that I know fairly well is Hermann Hesse. And kind of the full Hermann Hesse, like a little bit of Siddhartha, because this is a kind of a coming of age story, and a little bit of Steppenwolf, because it's like, wait, what the hell is going on? It's just like, it's sort of a Hall of Mirrors situation. And then a little bit even of like the Glass Bead game, because there is this sort of the remote boys school kind of thing, living in isolation sort of thing, and a sort of mystery pulling you out into the world. So, so that feels like a good comparison. For me, that's sort of, there's like a Venn diagram overlap between at least this book by John Fowles and some of the work of Hermann Hesse. On this, thinking of it as a coming of age story, because I think it is effectively a coming of age story. What do you think what is your opinion of our protagonist here, of Nicholas Urf? And you had mentioned, I'm assuming that's how we say it, is Urf, Urfe. How do you feel about Nicholas Urf? Do you relate to him? Do you hate him? Like, what's your feel for him?
I like him. I like him. Of course, I see a lot of myself in him. At least not me currently, because I'm 42 years old and married with children.
Right.
Definitely me in my 20s, and he's an asshole. To be honest.
Right.
And he's a very interesting character because he is a guy that was born like in the 20s, very much like the author. Like, if you're familiar with John Fowles' biography, it's obviously based on himself, and not word for word, but very similar, because he also went to Oxford and that kind of stuff. Kind of an idealized version of himself in a way. But Nicholas, he's the son of a brigadier general during World War II, and his mom is like basically a general's wife. She's kind of a traditional British follower, woman, and he goes to Oxford, and he basically misses World War II, right? I think that's a key thing to kind of understand about him. He missed World War II completely, and he graduates and he goes into the army or the Marines or something like that, and he's only in there for like a year as Britain demobilizes from World War II. So he doesn't have any action, he doesn't do anything, and he hates the military because he's kind of a mod. I think they even use that word to describe him. He's kind of a proto-mod, proto-hippie kind of guy, and he is. Okay. You're kind of a prototypical British, like, upper middle class. He's not a high class guy. He's not an upper class guy, but he's your typical British upper middle class, and he's an asshole. And he's adapted all these like fantasies about being an existentialist, and he talks about how like he hung around the cafes and drank wine, and I think the whole book, the whole book and everything is basically him coming to terms with that. Like, it's a postmodern book in a way that it rejects both the ancient kind of mystical world, and at the same time rejects the rejection of the ancient mystical world. That's kind of like the dichotomy in the book, in himself, because he's like, I'm not a hard science guy anymore, a hard, materialist, but I'm also not, he doesn't believe in the mystical side of things, and he has to kind of like blend the two, and he comes up as something else towards the end. But I think that's the kind of the main tension of the novel, is like, you pit this, post World War II materialist, existentialist wannabe kind of mod guy into this world that's like ancient and insane and weird,
Right. No, I totally love that. And I know there's definitely, I think this is one of the things that's so sort of resonant about the book, is even though it's, it's whatever, 60 years old at this point, and it's set another decade earlier than that, there is this sort of like way that Urf stands in for, I mean, what you could imagine, the process that a lot of like well-educated men might have gone through, who had sort of like just missed World War II, trying to like confront the post-war world. The old systems seem kind of irrelevant in some way. Not saying they actually are, but they might feel that way. And trying to just like navigate, like, yeah, what is this world now? Like, all the crap my parents told me, my grandparents, like, none of that stuff seems like it really applies. How do we sort of pick and choose our way through the 20th century? And as I was reading it, I related to a lot of those things. And it's funny, this is a book, and I think a lot of sort of coming of age books are sort of like this, where I feel like when they're really well done, you could probably read it when you're like roughly Nicholas Urf's age, and then read it when you're like our age. Right. I'm 42 as well. And then read it like, 20 years from now, and you get 3 different readings. Because as I'm reading it, Urf keeps doing stuff, and I'm like, you asshole. And yet, but at the same time, it's not the same. I don't despise him. It's like if your little brother did something dumb. It's like, dude, don't do that. Why are you doing that? It's not a, oh man, you're a piece of crap. It's like you're making a totally young mistake. You're not really seeing the situation. You think you're this, and I related to that. It sparked, more than a couple memories of myself at like 21, 22, 23, 24. And I did stuff sort of not thinking there was really a future. And I don't mean that in a nihilistic way. Just like, it's just going to be like this forever, right? I'm going to have this energy. I'm going to have these interests. I'm going to have like
bounce
these
around
priorities.
in my car.
It's always going to be like this. Yeah. Right. Right. And that's fine. Yeah.
Well, so
exactly.
what's interesting about
couch.
Just be a bum, take a job in Greece. No, but you're absolutely right, because from my perspective now, I look back and I'm like, what an idiot. Why did you do that? Like, why did you abandon the main character, female or whatever, right? And I look at him and I go, no, I did the same exact stuff. I was this character in my 20s. And there's this opening scene, and for listeners that have not read the novel, it has the book's action doesn't start for a few chapters, right? It does a big setup, and it's actually important for the end. Mm-hmm. But at first, you're like, man, what is this about? It takes place in London, and it has nothing to do with anything. Where's Greece, right? And he just graduates, and he takes a job as a teacher, and he hates it. He hates everybody around him. He's in a small town. He's like, I hate everybody. And he quits, and he goes back to London, and he's applying for jobs everywhere. He's like, I just want to go off on an adventure. I want to go to like Italy or to like, I don't know, to like whatever. And he has nothing but like this like young male kind of contempt for everybody. He judges. Mm-hmm. It's very sexist, but by our contemporary standards, it would be a tough sell if you're reading this in 2027, but it's exactly how men think. So he's talking to the girl, and she's like, she's kind of cute, but she's kind of dumpy at the same time. And then he goes home to his flat in London, and some fat girl with a dumb Australian accent knocks on his door, and he's like, invites him to a party. He's like, I don't want to go. This is dumb. And he goes downstairs, and they're all ugly and gross, and he hates everybody. He's just that guy. He's like, that scene at the beginning of the book is like that meme. That meme with the guy sitting in the corner, like, and everybody's having a good time.
Yeah,
like,
they don't know. Yeah, they don't know. They don't know how Byronic and poetic I am, or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, right. That's what he's doing. He's sitting there. Yeah. He brings I think he brings like a douchey, like some fancy wine or port or something like that to this like party of Australians that are probably drinking cheap beer, And he's like, and then that's when he meets the female protagonist, right, Allison, and he like falls in love with her instantly because he's a romantic, and. Yeah, and then he leaves her. He leaves her because he gets, the same day he meets her, actually he applied for that job in Greece to teach, at the Lord Byron School of British Literature on the island of Fraxis or whatever. And he's one of those guys where like, should I stay with her? Should I go? Should I stay or should I go? But it's like this inner battle where his educated, postmodern kind of modernist mindset says, I don't believe in love. I don't love at all. I don't attach myself to people. And in a way, she's like that too, right? She's like a air. What is this? Stewardess, air, whatever the term for it is now. What's it called? Flight attendant, right? And she's traveling around, and she's technically engaged to some other dude. So they're all trying to be like this modern sexual revolution kind of era. Yeah. And he decides to go. So he goes. He abandons her and says, yeah, we'll have a long-distance relationship over mail or whatever. And but he's bullshitting her. He's bullshitting her, right? He's like, yeah, sure. He knows he's going to break up with her. He's going to abandon her as soon as he has no intention of being a loyal, long-distance relationship with her. He because it's a first-person narrative, so you're getting that from him in his mind. He's like, I'm gonna meet some hot Greek girl and have a affair.
Right. Yeah, he in fact, I think, says like he had mastered this like sort of getting out of entanglements with women, right? Where it's like he had like a whole like almost like a form letter that he sent them, and then it's like now you just after that you just have to like wait a little while and not write as many letters, and then it kind of just ends. Yeah, he's
right. He details his past relationship with a girl that like he met on vacation that loved them, and then she's like, I want to marry you, and he's like, no, and he like ran away. He's like, I'm the master. He's like, I'm better at breaking up with women than picking up women. I think he says that. So he's a total kind of D-bag, you know, when you take it into that perspective.
Yeah.
But I love him. He's great.
Yeah. I mean, he's a real person, right? There's no like attempts to make him like any better than a dude, you know. he's a guy. Right.
He's definitely not a dashing hero.
Right. And so you don't expect, you know, and then he immediately, he does get the job on the island. He goes there. There's some conflict with Allison, obviously, because he's going to this island. She's going to go become an air hostess. And then he has this moment of like relief when it's like he's finally sort of relieved from the pressure of having to deal with her. And he's sort of like, so almost, I don't know if he's like, he makes some kind of gesture of like enthusiasm that I think later on we find out that she actually witnessed it. And the fact that like the last time they spoke while they were in London before he went to the school, he I don't know. I imagine in my head he like turned around and like pumped his fist or something kind of. And so yeah, he goes off to Fraxis, and he's in this school it's named the Lord Byron School, which is kind of cute, honestly. It's like perfect because Irf is in his like Byron arc. I don't know if he really is, or he's sort of trying to live that kind of like brooding, poetic, I'm too complicated. Like nobody can really understand me. He's like you said, he's sort of the guy in the corner of the party. I've been there for sure.
I'm still that
guy. Right. So I get it. I get it. But he brought one of the funniest things to me in the book, and it's not funny because of how it's written, but just sort of like just in the way things work out, is like pretty much as soon as he gets there, he realizes he's not a poet. He's just like, shit, I can't do this actually. Which
he's like, I actually suck.
I actually suck at this. And then of course the island is nowhere near as like, I mean, it's sort of physically beautiful, but it's boring. You're at a boys' school. Like there's a little village there with a couple little taverns in it. There's no prospect of getting with like a village girl. Like I think even one of the other teachers kind of tells him that's not happening. And the only thing really of interest left on the island is the what's called the waiting room, which is where the previous person that had his position basically told him to beware of it, right?
Right, this cryptic like Carcosa thing where he meets up with a guy that just like got fired from the same job, or relieved. He meets up with him in London, and this guy's actually a much cooler version of himself because he's a highly educated but military guy. You know, he actually did serve in World War II. He was like a commando or something like that. And he comes back, and the guy's like, yeah, it was pretty cool. It was interesting, but just beware of the waiting room. And he's like, what does that mean? He's like, nah, just beware of the waiting room. And that he leaves it at that. So he kind of like spurgs out about it for a bit, like trying to figure out what this waiting room thing is. And what I was thinking just now is that in a way, he is kind of like those guys on like Twitter, on X, that are like, oh man, just leave the city, bro, and go live out in the countryside. You're gonna meet this hot girl that works at the gas station, and she's gonna be like, 0 body count, and she's gonna marry you, and she's so hot, and she's just waiting around for you intellectual like college guys, the sensitive young men to pick her up out in Alabama or Tennessee or wherever, which is just a fantasy that that's a contemporary fantasy that some dudes have. And he goes there and he's like, oh, this is an island filled by a bunch of Greek peasants, they raise goats and sheep, and
he doesn't even he doesn't even speak Greek, so there's like nothing's happening on that end, right?
Yeah.
And there is like this weird, it's sort of like in passing too, there is like this moment where he kind of like, he gets so sort of lonely and he's so sort of wound up in his head or whatever. He does sort of like look at the boys for a minute. I don't know if you remember this passage.
He kind of gaze out a bit. He has a little bit of a homoerotic fantasy.
Yeah.
And I think that's because he's reading too much Byron. That's his problem right there. It's getting into him. It's hot, it's sunny out there, and he's just like, I just know women. I'm in a boys' school. Might as well just Byron out all the way.
Right. And then he gets. There's also he like tries to commit or he doesn't. I shouldn't say try, because that means it's like it happened and he survived. He almost attempts suicide, right? He borrows a gun from somebody to go shoot quail or whatever, kind of hiking around on the island, and he really contemplates suicide because he's sort of so lonely. He's so sort of overwrought about Allison. The letters between he and Allison, like that whole process is not really going well.
Right.
And that it's interesting. Like there are even specific moments that you can see him. I mean, because one of the things that's kind of cool about this book, and we'll get to more of that. There is some real like psychological depth and realism to this stuff. Some of the stuff that Nicholas Earp says to his, in this case, like Allison, but there's other women too. It does like. You can see, there's like one point he says to Allison, I wish I wasn't so damn complicated. And she like kind of mocks him for saying that. And that felt like a very like contemporary thing for a sensitive young man to say, to sort of try to get out of the complications of romance. But once he's on the island, the real sort of juice of this book, like all that stuff about Allison in London, it's all really, really well written. But I think what gives this book its staying power, to me anyway, is once Maurice conscious. I'm assuming it's supposed to read like the word conscience or conscious.
Yeah, right. That's how I read it.
Yeah. It's when he shows up on the scene is I think when this book takes its turn into like enduring kind of masterpiece. And I guess for people who haven't read it, he's a sort of 60-something-ish. I kind of read it in the intro. This doctor, his intentions are very ambiguous. There's this possibility that he's a World War II collaborator, or that's at least the rumor. I was curious. Well, how do I? Well, what are your sort of initial thoughts about Maurice Conscious, and then we got to get into like what Conscious's whole project is, which I still don't 100% understand. I don't think.
Right. Well, first, what's interesting is that he's been on the island for almost a year now, right? Mm-hmm. And right. It's like Thirst Island for this guy, right? He is just. He's gotten to the point where he's thirsting so hard, he's thirsting for like the teenage boys that he's teaching, and he falls into a thirst trap, like a actual physical like thirst trap. He's walking down the beach on the side of the island he's never really been to. He's like, oh, I'm just checking out the side of the island. There's this great beach, and I think he finds like a bikini in a book or something like that, and he's like, what? There's a bikini in a book, And he's like, no, these island hillbillies basically would have a bikini. I didn't see any, So he's like, well, now I'm intrigued, and he basically follows like a crumb trail to this kind of like mansion, kind of this villa in the side of the island that he's been told to kind of avoid, and that's where he meets Conscious, and it's this guy is obviously the main reference here is that the island and the kind of the title of the book, the Magus, is really a reference to Shakespeare's The Tempest, right? And Prospero. So he meets the Magus, right? Prospero, the wizard, the illusionist, basically, and he's got the servant that makes him like he has like breakfast, and he's just like he immediately falls in love with this old man, and not in like out of like intrigue, out of excitement,
Right.
because he's got this, strange man who he might be French, he might be Greek, he might be a German. You're not really sure. It's not really clear. I think he's French actually, right? Based on the name Maurice Conscious.
Yeah.
And he lives on this island. He's obviously some sort of a millionaire because he's got this crazy villa with all these like famous artworks. There's a few it's revealed like early on that there's like some Renoirs or something like that, like some paintings that he's like, is that a real one? And he's like, yeah, I bought it in Paris back in 1920 or whatever. And it's but it's like paintings that nobody's ever seen before. They're like undiscovered paintings because this guy's been keeping them under lock and key on this crazy unknown island off in the Aegean. And so he's immediately intrigued because he's meeting basically like everything he wants to be in a way.
Yeah,
right?
Very good. Yeah. And you've got this like it's an irresistible thing, right? So he's been told, Nicholas has been told not to go there. So that's the reverse psychology. He's been set up to do that. And then he's also, Maurice Conscious is the most interesting thing happening on this island by far, like objectively. Like there's nothing else happening out there. So I think anybody in Nicholas Earp's situation would be like, yeah, I think I'm going to go check out what this guy's doing. Like I want to see what's happening here.
And there was a bikini on the beach.
And there's a bikini. Yeah, so there's a hot chick somewhere in this villa. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, which he doesn't see, and then things start getting crazy. All right, so you can go ahead and tell us some of the craziness that starts happening.
Yeah, so it's well, one thing that's kind of interesting. One thing that like piqued my, because I was reading this for the first time. I didn't know. I sort of knew generally that, okay, now this is the Magus and things are gonna get weird. And I'd read the back cover copy and all that, so I kind of had a sense. But like, there's all these like interesting little setups that happen right away. Conscious tells him not to ask him any questions. Like you're basically, at first anyway, he sort of disallows Nicholas to ask him any questions. And then he asks, so right off the bat, Maurice is doing all these things to set up the intrigue to be as thick as possible. Because he also says to Nicholas, "Are you elect?" Which it's an interesting question for somebody you just met to ask you, right? Because it suggests that Maurice is part of something exciting and exotic and sophisticated and maybe even a little sexy. Nicholas is kind of unsure at first. He thinks that Maurice just might be a gay dude who's basically hitting on him, and at some point he realizes that's not the case. But even then, Nicholas is like, well, even if he is, let's just see where this goes. I don't know. We're hanging out in a villa. There's some ouzo. This could be cool.
Yeah, he's like, this guy will tell me some cool stories, blah, blah, blah.
Right. Right. But pretty quickly, the sort of door is open for Nicholas to come back on weekends. He has to walk across the island. There's a sort of a hike he has to do across the island to get there. And then Maurice pretty quickly gets him sort of wrapped up in what is much, much later in the book, and here's where maybe some spoilers start showing up. Much, much later in the book, it's referred to as the God game. And it's this, I refer to it as like a piece of living theater, and I think theater is probably the best reference. But basically, it's an elaborate sort of narrative game at which Nicholas is the center of it. It's all sort of I almost said entertain, but it's not to entertain. It's to affect some kind of psychological or spiritual change, but sort of in the hard way. It's like, this is where I get kind of almost trip myself up of like, what exactly are Maurice's intentions? Are they good? Are they bad? Is it for... I can see it in all ways. I can see it just being for almost like a sadistic kind of thing, but I can also see it as like, we do this because this is actually good for Nicholas, or and you find out that all of the other people that have been in Nicholas's job have also gone through this to varying degrees. But I'm trying to think of like the first thing that's really weird that happens. Is it he hears people walking around outside. I know is one thing that happens
Right.
while they're hanging out.
Well, one thing is so Nicholas is thirsty, right? He's very thirsty, right?
That's like the
And
central. That's his motivating drive. I
yeah,
think.
he is a man. He is the man led by his thirst, right? And he's been
Yeah.
parched, and he sees pictures of a woman on like the mantle, and Conscious is like, well, that's my, and he tells him a story about Alice, his old love, and all this stuff, and later that night he sees a ghost.
Right.
He sees the woman from the photograph, and he's like, what? Like she's walking around, and he's like, okay. So he kind of like brushes it off as like, I'm just, this dude drugged me or something. He hypnotized me. I don't know what's going on here,
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah.
And then it's out there, and then Conscious tells him a story about like World War One and a bunch of just a kind of a very detailed like war story about his own life. And I believe later that night he's sitting in his room because Conscious like sits down with him. They have dinner and they drink tea or ouzo or whatever, and then he's like, all right, Nicholas, good night, and like takes off. He just goes off into his strange Prospero chamber of whatever. And he goes to his like own chamber. It's very like 19th century Victorian themed almost. It's got that ghost story kind of vibe. And he's sleeping, and he hears the Tripoli song. It's a long way to Tripoli or whatever. It's like a British like military song. And he looks outside his little veranda balcony, and through the forest he sees a bunch of like British soldiers walking.
That's
Right? And he's like, okay,
Yeah.
what's going on? But he's a skeptic, right? He's a skeptic, right? Because somewhere in the book, probably early on, I wrote it down, but I don't remember exactly where, he writes, he says something along the lines of, the line reads, we stood and went into the music room. As we put our glasses on the tray, he said, there are things that words cannot explain. And Nicholas goes, I look down, and he says, at Oxford, we are taught to assume that if words can't explain, nothing else is likely to. So he's kind of a skeptic. He's a non-religious guy. He even dogs on Catholicism a few times earlier in the novel. So yeah, weird stuff starts happening like that, where things that Conscious tells him, these long stories, are followed by events or in-person things on Fraxos that reflect what he was just being told.
Right. And you're right. It started, and Irf's reaction to this is sort of skepticism, sort of not trusting his eyes. But you do kind of realize that Maurice is, well, and Maurice even says this, Conscious does, he's setting out like a deliberate, like there's almost like every night there's the centerpiece of their night hanging out is that Conscious is going to tell this story that is pretty detailed from his own, as you said, from his own life. But there's also we're walking through Conscious's life, which is frankly pretty interesting. Like those, I really, really enjoyed the parts where Conscious is just telling a story. And I don't know, and Irf takes them sort of at face value that these are just stories straight from Maurice Conscious's life, which, as you kind of read back, it's sort of like, well, clearly it becomes pretty obvious that the seams of what between what is actually happened and what is contrived to impart some kind of thought experiment / lesson to Nicholas Irf. It's not clear where the truth and fiction lie within the novel, within the stories Conscious is telling that are within the novel, and then these aspects of these stories bleed out into the real world in a more and more elaborate fashion. So you get those British troops walking, and then you get the love of Conscious's young wife, Lily, I believe. Yeah, Lily. She has like 3 names in the book, ultimately. Lily sort of appears. And there's 2 of them, and they're twins, right? And they interchange, right? Nicholas, being the sort of hopeless romantic, immediately falls in love with her, even though at first I don't think he ever really thinks she's a ghost.
No, I don't think
but
so either.
but he has no explanation for who she is or what she's doing there. So he's constantly like, so wait, are you an actress? Like, what is this, right? and this is where, to me, like the real mystery starts to pile up. Not that you never get any answers, but like as soon as Nicholas sort of feels like he's poked a hole in what's actually going on, like, okay, is Lily and Conscious is deliberately, it seems, putting Nicholas and Lily together because she's apparently super hot. Nicholas falls for her immediately. They're roughly the same age, so he immediately like puts them together and is sort of nudging them towards romance. And she's very flirtatious, and she plays the game very well. She's sort of playing hard to get, but not so hard to get as to be a turnoff. But there's, but yeah, there's no. So one thing I liked about it, just from a story, the way the story comes together way, is that as soon as Nicholas feels like he's identified some aspect of what's going on, either Lily tells him like a different story or Maurice tells him a different story. So I don't remember the exact order, but at one point, like, Lily admits to being an actress, but then he goes to talk to Maurice, and Maurice is like, listen, she's a schizophrenic. There's no cure. The best thing we can do is have her out here and have her just kind of live this role out. I'm doing my best to take care of her, but please don't tell her that Right. And so then this next layer. And as a reader, you're like, well, I'm not sure which of those two things it is exactly. Like, and if I let myself fall for one, am I falling for the same thing that Nicholas Earp is falling for? This is one of the pleasures of reading it, is it's like, you kind of want to be smarter than Nicholas Earp, but you kind of aren't as the reader. You only have the same information that he has to go on.
Right. And this is where like the weird postmodernist kind of metafiction comes in, Yeah. One interesting note about was it Alice? I can't keep track of all her 7 names either. Right?
Yeah. Lily.
Lily is her as the dead girlfriend or the dead love interest. Right. And she becomes, and then his girl, Nicholas's girlfriend back home, the London girlfriend, is Allison, right?
Right.
And they're interesting because there's a huge contrast between them. Lily is basically the fantasy girl of the sensitive Byronic man, right?
Right.
She's pale, waifish. She's very much out of she's a Shakespearean Ophelia, right? She's almost a 19th century Byronic heroine, vulnerable and like almost naive in her her behavior patterns, and she's very well contrasted to Allison, who Nicholas sees as beneath him in a way. There's a level of classism in Nicholas towards her because he's an Oxford guy. He's the son of a general who he doesn't have a lot of money, but he considers himself an upper class intellectual, kind of he's cooler than everybody in a way. And Allison, she's a freaking stewardess, Australian from the colonies, basically. Right. She's broke. She doesn't come from a wealthy or an intellectual family. I don't think she's even college educated.
No. She's promiscuous.
She's promiscuous, kind of like she's very like modish in her behavior. The only thing he liked about her initially was that she had long hair, which was, he makes a big point to point out that she has long hair, which was out of fashion because all the girls in London that year had like short mod haircuts,
Right.
And she's blonde and she's Australian, she's kind of a bro ho in a way, if you would use modern terminology, right?
Yeah.
And meanwhile, this Lily character he meets through this very exciting, mysterious kind of circumstances is is like, like right out of a 19th century novel. She's mysterious. She's like the kind of woman you see standing next to a lighthouse in a gloomy storm on the cover of one of those romance novels kind of characters, and that's his fantasy, right? He's going to figure it out. He becomes obsessed with going back every single weekend. He goes back to this house because he really, really, really wants to sleep with her. Like that's like his goal. That's his driving like motivation. But really is he feels special. Conscious makes him feel special. He's like, I am the sensitive young man. This guy might be playing some creepy, weird, Prospero homosexual game with me, but I'm definitely gonna win. I'm gonna win, and I'm gonna sleep with this girl. That's kind of his goal. He decides to accept everything as to play along with it in a way, because he's afraid that if he chimps out, Conscious is not going to call him back anymore. He doesn't want to not want to do it anymore, so he plays along.
Yeah, and it's a delicate relationship with Conscious because it's not like they're buddies, It's clearly like right off the bat there's this distinction between them. Or Conscious is this is stage managing the entire experience, even when it's just them sitting around, talking. There's a great this is slightly earlier than kind of the part roughly that we've come to in talking about it, but I just remembered just to remind people who've read it and maybe give people who haven't read it a sense of some of the other things that Maurice Conscious is up to. After he tells Nicholas about his experience in World War I, and in fact, in his experience in World War I, there's this great passage about the violence of World War I. It gets dark and heavy and violent for a little bit. And then Conscious had, in this story he's telling, we don't know if this happened or not, but he deserted at one point. And then, he ruins things with Lily because she thinks he needs to go back for his own sake, et cetera, et cetera. But then in the current timeline with Nicholas in the room, Maurice basically brings out a game that he wants to play. He's got a he brings out a dice and some old cyanide teeth like a spy would have, right? That you bite down on and poison yourself. And he basically is like, I'm gonna offer you the entire experience of war in 1 second. And Maurice says, if you roll a 6, agree. He gets Nicholas to agree to this. If I roll a 6, you're gonna bite this cyanide pill basically and kill yourself. We're playing like a elaborate game of Russian roulette without a gun, right? And he rolls the dice, and Nicholas agrees to this, and Maurice promptly rolls a 6, and Nicholas does not take the poison pill, and Maurice tells him that's exactly the right thing to do. But there's also like, as a reader, there's this moment of like, first of all, it's like he shouldn't have agreed to that. But Maurice talks him into it because he says, quote, "A young man who will not risk his life even once is both a fool and a coward." And like, that sounds cool as a thing to say, but like, risk your life over the roll of a dice? Like, what would be... What's the upshot of any of this, right? Right. But then, of course, Nicholas doesn't take the cyanide, which he wouldn't. And then Maurice says that was the right thing to do. So now you're in this like weird world of like trying to please Maurice, but then like, what's the next thing he's going to ask him to do? It's a really cool moment.
Right, because you gotta be like, okay, so he's trying to impress this old guy that's obviously like a super sophisticated. And he's also trying to, sleep with this girl that's also on this island for some bizarro reason, whether she's, a ghost, a schizophrenic, an actress, or like, and it has to be irresistible, right? It has to be irresistible. He's just like, it's kind of a lose-lose situation for him in a way, right? Because he can't look like a total wuss in front of her, and which he does because he does kind of back down, but it's like... and he's the extent of his like rational thinking is being tested to the max in a way where he's playing along, but he's trying to be like this modern, post World War II kind of got badass intellectual, but he's not. He's basically he's getting like everything's getting peeled. Like he's getting like every layer of his personality is getting peeled away by conscious, and in front of the object of his desire.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because if you think about like the sort of pedagogical like thing that conscious is doing, having Lily around for all these like key moments is really. It reminds me of. So I briefly taught at a boys' school, 7th and 8th graders, right? Briefly, and I wasn't on an island, a Greek island. It was actually a yeshiva of all things, so it was very Orthodox Jews, and I was the only non-Jewish person in the building, which is a very strange experience for another conversation. But one thing I realized teaching these boys, especially at that age, and it's still true, but even a little less true as they get older, is sort of like having boys, girls segregated. It makes sense on one level, but at least for boys, there's something about having women, girls present that changes our focus in good and bad ways. So like these boys that I was teaching, you could not embarrass them. So imagine what your behavior would be like at 13 if there was no level of embarrassment ever, no matter whatever happened, you did not get embarrassed because who are you to be embarrassed in front of, right? And yeah, so it's like it just presents like this interesting like dynamic that adds like a certain kind of tension to everything. And it's really interesting. Which brings me to this thing is like, and maybe I'm putting the cart before the horse here. What do you think Conscious is trying to do? Like, what is his ultimate objective here?
Well, so, I mean, that's a tough one. I think his ultimate objective is to make him make the choice that he makes at the end, right? Which we can't spoil it because I think it's interesting to leave it open-ended.
Yeah.
I think that... there's that line that you mentioned also in your message word. Let me find it real fast about the water and the wave.
Oh yeah, are you drinking the water or are you drinking the wave? Yeah,
right. So he asks him that. Well, I think we need to go back and explain that question. That line before, because I think that line is itself the key to the whole novel, right? So. One of the stories that Conscious tells him, I think it's the second story in like in his life story that he tells Nicholas, is Conscious is a musician and he's a young man. Yeah. He's very much the same age as Nicholas is right now, and it's he's playing a harpsichord, which is. Once again, he's not beating the gay vibe, right? He's playing a harpsichord in Paris, and he's playing with his window open, and the maid or something comes up and is like, "Oh, hey, this guy walked off the street and wants to talk to you," and it's this really weird guy, right? What was his name?
Dukins.
Dukins, yeah, Dead Dukins. And the guy's like, "Oh, I really enjoyed your playing. I heard it from the street. Would you come to my flat? My domain." And it's interesting because it very much mirrors what's going on in the present, right?
Yeah.
And so young Conscious goes to this guy's like domain in Paris, and it's this like super expensive, elaborate, like perfect like apartment. And he finds out this guy is some sort of a very stereotypical like 19th or even 18th century noble, living in mid-century Paris, and the guy's into like bird. He's like a really weird guy, right? He's like one of the weirdest characters. He's into like bird watching, and he's obsessed with like the sounds of birds. And after they have this relationship where every weekend Conscious goes to hang out with this older guy, which is very similar to what Nicholas is doing with Conscious right now. And they end up at his like chateau in France. And this guy has this giant like domain. He's got a manor, you know, and he's really, really freaking weird because he's got this giant manor filled with like all sorts of like art, and he's a collector. He's got all this art, and he's got like robots, like those like medieval what are they called, automatons or whatever, automatons, right?
Yes.
And
yes,
he has a Japanese tea house and all these weird
one
things.
One of his automatons is a sex robot that, unless you know where the lever is, it will like stab you in the crotch. Do you remember this?
I do, yeah. It's like just weird stuff, right? And he meets this guy, and he's sitting there in his tea house in his kimono, right? Watching like swans in his like lake, and it's just this crazy dude. Oh, and he is a world-renowned collector of spiders.
Right. Yeah.
And he's even has a spider named after him or something crazy like that. And but this dude, what's interesting about him is he hates women. Right. Mm-hmm. He hates women with like a passion, so much so that he has no female servants. No women are allowed on his like giant land. He has, nothing. Right. It's like there's no females whatsoever. And he is this, and they have a lot of back and forth about Marxism and nobility and noblesse oblige and stuff, and how, Conscious is like, well, one of your paintings could feed 1 million families or starving families or whatever. How could you sit here and like live in your kimono while there's starving people out there? Very like contemporary, conversations, right? And this guy's hanging out with his weird sex robot and his kimono and his swans and his spiders. And one of his artworks could feed like a family for 10 years or something. And they're having this kind of Marxist kind of back and forth, and you find out that like all this money this dude has comes out of like Black Africa, out of the Belgian Congo. So it's like basically like colonial extortion money, from like King Leopold's mines and stuff.
So you don't have to be like a Marxist to be like, oh man, this is actually kind of fucked up.
Right. But at the same time, he's this angelic figure that is completely naive about the world outside of his like almost like autistic like obsessions with beauty and perfection, But then this dude, he hears a woman one day. He hears a woman. One of his servants brings some like local like peasant girl or something like that, and he hears her laughing, and he just chimps out. He's like, oh, I can't ruin my domain, and he takes off to Italy. And
that's right, I forgot about that part. He just bails on his estate.
Like, oh, his estate is ruined. He heard the sound of a woman's voice in his like in his like goon cave, right? And he takes off to Italy, and while he's in Italy, everything burns down. Like there's a fire, and he comes back, and all his art, all these like priceless art that art that's unknown to mankind, right? Unknown to the art world, because it's like from like the great masters that have been undiscovered, just very much like what Conscious has in Greece. And he ends up dying, right? He dies like 3 days later, like in a hotel room somewhere. And he leaves young Conscious all his money. He leaves him all his money and all this stuff. And what's interesting, there's even a kind of an interesting aside that caught my attention the other day, which when you're talking about all this art he has, Conscious goes, yeah, and he collected art before the art became a stock market, right? He collected art for art's sake before it was a stock market, before like the modern, it's basically John Fowles, the author, commenting on how the modern world has become like kind of obscene, to where art and culture are now capitalist financial kind of trading. Like the art world is a stock market scam, basically. It's a tax write-off for rich people and stuff. So he's kind of making this comment, and it's interesting, and that's where he gets his money. But he leaves him all his money. He leaves him his crazy flat in Paris, and he leaves him this note, and the note says, the wave or the water, right? It's in Latin, and let me see if I can find it. I wrote it down, of course, but I'm completely... That's what he says. because it's really interesting, like what he means by that, right? And I think, and yes, he asks him like, you drink the wave or you drink the water, right? And it's kind of a Nietzschean reference, right? I think, and I think what it means is, it's very like the whole like Apollonian versus Dionysian kind of like thing, right? Where will you ride the wave? Will you go along with the energies of the world, or will you just sip from it, and kind of live in the calm? I think that's what he means by that. And in a way, that's what Nicholas is doing, right? He's kind of like, right now he's kind of drinking the water, but is he going to go through with it all the way? Is he going to buy into Conscious's game, right? Is he going to like fully commit to like this like Dionysian kind of like abandon that, in a way his philosophical ideas as a young man coming out of Oxford, this is kind of the end stage, right? He's supposed to be this libertine. He's supposed to turn his back on the past, right? He's supposed to turn his back on, he starts off the novel. The novel starts off with him dissing on Queen Victoria, right? He even says in the shadow of this monstrous dwarf. He calls Queen Victoria a monstrous dwarf, right?
Which is like, hilarious. Yeah.
Right. He rejects like his Oxford status and this like Victorian Puritanism and the common life. He has nothing but contempt. Like the book starts off with him going off to be a teacher in that like kind of middle of nowhere kind of old something that like would be an idyllic. If Tolkien was writing that scene, it would be an idyllic Hobbit school, of like small town British life.
Right.
But he despises it, right? He hates it. He's like, oh, these people are losers and they're monstrously boring and they're all failures at life. And I'm a poet. I'm this artist and I'm a libertine. I just sleep with women and dump them. I'm badass at dumping women. And the end result is what Conscious has given him, right? Like riding that wave, right? And he, in a way, he crashes against that, right? Because he finds it completely obscene, right? Especially in the movie scene later on, right?
It's like it's too much when he's confronted with like what it ultimately means or can mean. It's like, oh, actually, I'm a Puritan. Never mind.
Right. Yeah. right. He's like, actually, I want to be a committed guy in a relationship. You know what I mean?
Right.
He's like, oops, my bad. I don't want to be a satyr. you know?
Right.
And this is where you get that crazy scene right after this, where in the middle of this story, there's like a horn, like a horn blowing from outside, and it's like the coolest scene because it's straight out of like a Midsummer's Night Dream kind of thing where a horn blows, and he runs to the veranda, the balcony or whatever, and it's super contrived, and he's like, oh, this is so cheesy, but he's like captivated by it because there's all these spotlights like hitting the forest, and freaking Apollo walks out. And then this beautiful woman walks out, and he's like, wait a second, there's another girl on the island? Because Lily's next to him, but now there's another girl on the island. And he's like,
that's right. That's when he figures out there's two of them. Right.
And so there's this girl, and she's dressed like a nymph, and out of the forest comes a satyr with this giant like penis, basically, right? This giant phallus, and he's like, God, that's vulgar, and he's just like shocked by it. He's like, he becomes a British prude. He becomes like, he's like, he's like, well, intellectually, I'm supposed to like this. I'm Lord Byron over here, I'm in Greece, but he's like shocked by this like 7 foot tall black dude with a giant phallus, right, chasing this little dainty nymph through the forest, and he's like, what? And then this other girl comes out, and now there's another girl going on here, and she shoots an arrow, and there's this whole like very like like Midsummer's Night Dream kind of thing going on, and he's like, and he's pissed off because he's like, wait a second, like there's other people now. Like he finds out it's not just him and Conscious. There's other people running around this, whatever the hell Conscious is doing to me, you know? And he's almost like shocked and scandalized between like, it's like, it's, you know, like liberal people, very progressive people tend to be all about like, you know, it's kind of a dichotomy, right? You see this in our contemporary progressives, right? Where they'll talk about like, you know, sex work is real work and blah, blah, blah. But then you show them sex and they freak out and they want a warning, you know? The same people that are like, sex work is real work are scandalized when there's a sex scene in a movie or a book.
Right. No, that's true. Yeah. Yeah. That is this interesting dichotomy. It's sort of a, you know, I've thought before that like now everything, sex is almost like as a topic is like very public. Right. And this isn't even a judgment. This is just an observation. Like there's a lot of standards for like how you can dress are very different. So you can dress in a very sexualized manner and that's all cool and whatever. But people seem to be having less sex. And then if you go back like to like the 60s, the 50s, the 60s, maybe not the 60s, but the 50s, the public attitudes around sex are much more conservative, but I think they were actually probably having just as much or more sex behind the scenes.
Right, absolutely. You know, you can see this in movies from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, you know. You watch movies from those eras, and they're a lot more sexual. There's a lot of sexual innuendos. I mean, you watch a comedy like you know, something very mainstream like Ghostbusters, the first Ghostbusters, and it's chock full of sexual innuendos and jokes, and it's kind of pervy in a way, to the point where it's kind of like from our contemporary mindset, which we're supposed to be like the most open progressive people on the planet. It's almost like, oh no, is there a warning on this? You know, like, oh my, you know, and I remember I used to watch that movie like as a kid, you know, and it's like, right. So intellectually, we've intellectualized sex, but at the same time, we've sterilized it. And I think in a way, Nicholas is very much like us today, where he intellectualizes all these, romanticizes this fantasy of himself as this existentialist, but he's deep down really a upper middle class British prude that is shocked when he sees the satyr with the 10-inch phallus running around the forest in later scenes. Which is very interesting, because I think that's what Conscious is trying to show him, right? He's trying to show him that like your philosophy is intellectual nonsense, and you yourself are not that, you know, like you yourself are a lie. Your outlook on life is a lie, because you are not drinking the water or riding the wave. You're neither of those things, you know?
Yeah. And yes, no, I think that's exactly right. And I think Conscious is doing this ultimately he's doing it on multiple levels. And the sexual is one of the levels. But one of the other parts that I found was really interesting is how I think Conscious is sort of manipulating or dealing with Nicholas's sort of rationality, right? So, you know, as we've said, Nicholas is this Oxford student, and so he's a man of reason. I think he declares his atheism at one point in the story, and there's a sense of what he reminds me of is in this regard is like the people who are very much like believe in quote science, but like never really took more than like a chemistry class. You know what I mean?
He's an English major, right? So.
Right. Yeah. They like buy into it all, but have never really thought through any of it or dealt with, like confronted any of it actually. So they just kind of like outsource all of their faith in it to, you know, somebody else has figured this out. And then Conscious presents him with this. Conscious was part of a group called in one of the stories he's telling, one of these sort of almost like these modern parables that Conscious is purportedly telling from his own life. One of them is that he was part of a group called, and this is, I don't know if this was like when he was in medical school or when he was a young doctor, because Conscious is supposedly a doctor.
A psychiatrist,
even though I'm not even sure if that's true. Like, but he presents
Totally
himself
anything.
as such. Yeah. But he was part of the Society of Reason, and they had a manifesto, and the manifesto is very like rigorously ideological about like, I will always do everything with reason. I will never not do anything with that's irrational. You know, like all of these sort of, it has all these sort of steps. And then, you know, Conscious is presenting this as something that he's moved beyond. And I thought that this was like a really interesting move where it was sort of like, all right, Conscious is sort of the plan in his dealing with Nicholas Earp is like, all right, we got to get you to be a little less rational. And how we can accomplish this is like, I'm going to present myself to you in a previous part of my life as the most rational person, the most rational a person can possibly be, and then sort of show you how I moved away from that. Because then it makes being super rational, super reasonable kind of look silly to a certain degree. Because conscious is pulling off this like this classic like transference thing that I mean, this is still part of psychotherapeutic practice to my understanding, but this idea of like, I'm basically gonna like, as a therapist, I'm going to sort of become your father or your mother on some subconscious level. Then we're going to like heal that father or mother relationship. And then we're going to like offload it at the end. Right. Like that's how some psychotherapists have worked in the 20th century. And Conscious is doing that a little bit. And he's doing this with this rationality thing, which I thought was really a really interesting way to do it. And I think it works. And he also sort of, because part of the reason it works too is like on one side of it, I think shortly, I might be getting the sequence messed up here, either shortly, right before the Society of Reason stuff or right after the Society of Reason stuff, Conscious tells Nicholas that he's psychic. He suggests that Nicholas is also psychic. And then he basically induces a psychedelic experience in Nicholas by hypnotizing him. And which is a cool part of the book. He's sort of staring into the stars and he starts having these very strange visions, and Nicholas, the background that he's from, you know, he thinks he's this sort of like you know, a sort of free thinker, Byronic, poetic, you know, open to everything, but this is another way in which Conscious, you know, we have the sexual thing going on as well, but this is a way that Conscious is showing him like, no, actually, man, you're kind of limited. You're kind of parochial. Like, you kind of don't actually get it, and you kind of aren't exactly what you think that you are.
He just tears him down. He tears him down the whole time.
Yeah, it's kind of brilliant. I mean, this is the thing. It makes me think, like, if I decide that what I think Conscious is doing is a good thing, and then I think all this stuff is great. But I'm still not entirely sure if not entirely sure if Conscious's intentions are good or not. I kind of maybe I like that I don't know. But in some ways it reminds me of Fight Club when Edward Norton's character finds out that his apartment has been blown up. And he's on the phone, and Brad Pitt's character, Tyler Durden's in the background going, tell them that the man who destroyed all of your belongings has liberated you. You know, it's like, is Conscious destroying Nicholas Earp's life to give him an even better one? And I mean, to me, that also just kind of raises questions like, I was on another podcast not that long ago on the Mystical American Patriots Society podcast, which was a cool conversation. And one of the questions that came up about something else was like, do people actually change? Like, can they change? Like, how much can a person change? And when I read this book, I kind of realize that, like, I think the only way that people change is kind of when... It's a loaded word now, but it's kind of when something traumatic happens to them. Right. Like, I don't know.
Or something scary. You know, it's interesting because, I've said that I saw my young self as Nicholas, and in my 20s and, you know, even well into my mid 30s, I used to be an obnoxious rationalist atheist guy. I was probably, I wasn't like the fedora tipping Reddit atheist guy, but I was there. I saw myself as like, you know, religion is beneath me. There's no mysticism. I have
Right.
a pretty I've had some moments where I've alienated some people over that. I remember when I was first dating my wife, and she had this coworker that she was a nice girl, whatever, a younger girl, and she came over to our house, and we were all just drinking, socializing, and she mentions that her mom was like some kind of an osteopathic herbalist healer of some sort. And I remember I was like, oh my God, that's bullshit. Your mom's a fraud, a scam artist. And I'm like, 7 beers in, and I'm just completely I was just a complete and total like prick, right? That was embarrassing. Looking back at it, I'm like so ashamed of it. And, I basically ruined my wife's relationship with this girl, and I was like a hardliner. I'm like, no, and I was one of those guys that like way before COVID, way before COVID, I was one of those like, oh, anti-vax people are complete morons and that kind of stuff, and all this stuff, and I was a hardline Star Trek level atheist, basically. That's what I believed in.
I like that. I like Star Trek level as a level, because that's totally right.
Well, that's how I saw myself in a way. I was a Christopher Hitchens guy, so I was like, well, I'm not like into science or anything like that, but like it's real, right? And blah blah blah,
Right.
and just a strict materialist. And I I had a lot of events in my life that pointed me in other directions, and it was actually around the time I actually read this book for the first time that I started re-exploring, returning to religion after many years, and I felt like I actually felt like, wow, okay, I can, in a way, conscience broke me through a meta process of reading this book, where I was like, oh, well, maybe he's right, And the best story, in your message to me, you asked me which one was my favorite story that conscience tells Nicholas. My favorite one is the Norway one.
Yes, me too. Yes.
So for listeners, look, there's some spoilers in this podcast, right? But the thing is, this is a book that resists spoilers in a way, because it's first of all, the writing is beautiful. He does a fantastic job of just reading the prose is perfect, is beautiful. He describes Greece and even the bleakness of London really beautifully, and also there really is no spoilers because none of it makes sense, so it's almost like
I was just
you're gonna get something out of it completely different, even if I do spoil it, right?
I was just gonna say I can.
It.
Yeah, I was gonna say I can only spoil it so much because I only have like a 75% understanding of what happened.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I to the point where like I'm the kind of guy that like remembers a novel. Like if I read 20 years ago, I'll tell you detailed scenes from it. But rereading this novel, I was like, whoa, I don't remember that happening, or something, or like I noticed tons of new things that are from a completely different perspective, which is why I think it's one of the best novels of the 20th century, completely underrated. But there's a scene where Conscious is telling Nicholas, he's continuing his story about his life, and this happens after the weird noble guy and the burning because of the woman talking and stuff. So while that's happening, Mr. Conscious, young Conscious, the 25-year-old young psychologist in the Society of Reason or whatever, decides he's an expert in bird sounds, or the calls of birds, right? And he's basically exhausted all bird watching in France. So he decides to go to Norway on the Arctic Circle in the middle of nowhere. I forgot the name of the place he goes to, and he basically has to take a boat. And he gets there, and there's this intellectual farmer that used to be like a veterinarian or something like that in London that speaks English, and he lives out there isolated. And he gets to this Arctic Circle place. It's in August, so it's not cold, but he gets there, and it's immediately weird, right? It's like a farm. It's like very desolate, very like remote, like 50, 60 miles away from the nearest like village. And there's this dude, and a woman and 2 children living there. And they're dour, very Nordic, Norwegian types, farming out there, I don't know, peat farming or whatever they're doing out there in the middle of the, and it's just weird, right? Like, it's just, and he finds out right away that that's not his wife and kids. It's actually his sister-in-law. And he's like, well, this is weird, and he notices that every time they have dinner together, there's one person missing. He's like, okay, it's been like 4 days. We've had dinner together, and there's always one person missing. So he finally asks the guy, he's like, Gunther, like, what's going on, right? Like, where are you guys going? And the guy goes, oh, don't go to this part of the peninsula. It's blah, blah, blah. It's off limits. He's like, no, you got to tell me what's going on, because I saw your son, or, your son-in-law, not son-in-law, what is it, your nephew, right? Yeah. Take a bucket of milk out to this island. What do you got there? What's going on? He goes, okay, I got to admit it. He's like, my brother, her husband, he's not dead. He's just insane. Right. He's like, what do you mean he's insane? Right. And, so he goes, tells him the story. And I guess his brother is basically, in a way, the opposite of Nicholas Urfer, right? He's a hyper religious individual who has gone blind, and he lives on this peninsula, talking to God, basically. Yeah. And after all these days, he's kind of like freaking out. So Conscious decides, well, I'm a psychologist. I'm a psychiatrist. I'm going to fix this guy. So he goes out there, and he sees this dude, and he expects him to be this like hermit, this like a crippled old man living in a cave on this peninsula. But this dude is like a Nordic beast, right? He's like 7 foot tall. He's wearing like traditional, like the Nordic kind of wear. He's got like a staff, and he's got long hair, and he's got these piercing, like almost like hyperchromatic white eyes, right? And he's just a monster, he's like a something straight out of like some kind of a biblical Moses kind of figure. And he goes up to this dude's like hut, and he's like, oh, I'm a psychiatrist. I can fix your cataracts and blah, blah, blah. And the guy answers him by trying to chop his head off with an axe.
Yep.
He's like, well, I'm going to take that as a no. So he runs back, and all this stuff happens. And on the last night, you're sitting there, and this guy's just yelling. He's yelling in Norwegian or whatever, right? And he's like, what is he saying? And he's like, oh, he's talking to God. And Conscious goes out there with his brother, and he looks at this dude, and he realizes that, no, this guy is actually talking to God. He's not talking to God as in the sky, like asking him to show himself. He is literally like physically talking to God right now, and he sees God. And Conscious realizes that, like, this is real. This is real. And he basically just GTFOs out of there. He's like, I'm gone. Right. Peace out. And then you go back to the present. Nicholas like, so what happened to this guy? And Conscious is like, I don't know. Never talk to him about it again. And just leaves it at that. He's like, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know.
Right. Well, and then Conscious also says, that same night, it turns out, is the night that Dukin's estate burned down.
Right. As the hermit was seeing a pillar of fire.
Right.
And Nicholas is like, yeah, bullshit. He's like, right. he calls it out. And at the same time this story is being told, Lily is playing footsie with them under the table, right?
Right.
She's like rubbing her foot. So there's this weird, like, there's just so many layers of this like religious experience, the story. Nicholas is calling bullshit on like all of it. And meanwhile, this crazy, might be a schizophrenic, might be an actress, might be his daughter, it's like playing footsie with him. And he's like, does he know? Right. Does she not know? Does, and he's just stuck in these like multi-layered, like almost like insanity, and he can't leave. He just wants to come back over and over and over,
Yeah. And that story, I'm glad you brought that story up, because you gave a great sort of summary of it, because it was one of the most striking parts of the whole book to me. I mean, it's almost a part that, like, it could kind of stand alone, I think, if you want. Right. It's great in this context, but like, I could see that being excerpted for a magazine or an anthology of some kind. It's so potent. And honestly, thinking about some totally crazy blind guy out in it's like as remote as anywhere on Earth where they are, and just out by himself in the woods, just yelling at God that I'm waiting.
Right.
It's so intense. It gave me goosebumps reading it. I loved it.
And the way he describes him, you know, there's like the shock of like, because, you know, it's interesting when I read it, before the character is introduced, before he actually sees the hermit, the crazy brother, I also pictured him as some kind of like decrepit, insane, you know, homeless dude living in the peninsula. And then when he describes it, there's this comment of like, well, I expected a crazy, decrepit dude, but instead he's like this, you know, this almost like pagan god of a man, like, you know, living out there blind, very Odin kind of, you know, in his Nordic like sensibility and everything. And I'm like, oh man, this is crazy. You know, this guy's not. Maybe he's not crazy. You know,
well,
maybe.
And I think this is like one of the things that's like what Conscious is trying to do to Nicholas. It's to tell these sort of contradictory, unexpected, or present these contradictory, unexpected situations, or tell these stories where it's like, yeah, okay, so you're set up. Conscious thinks it's going to be this decrepit old man. We as the reader think it's going to be that, and Nicholas certainly thinks it's that. And that's telling us something about our preconceived notions about something, right? Like I think the idea, part of what Conscious is trying to present is that like the relationship with God does not have to be some like decrepit thing that comes out of like cowardice, fear of death. It's not necessarily that you're just a person so brain, because remember he's trying to, I think he's trying to knock Nicholas Earth off of his rational pedestal kind of that he's put himself on. And so instead presents him as this like this almost godlike figure, right? Physically powerful, like it's the whole dramatic scene. It's not about like cowardice. It's not about like, you know, begging God to make it so I can see again. It's none of that. It's something else entirely. And yeah, that's what's so cool about it. I don't know how much of that one got in through Nicholas Earth. I think he was probably maybe at that point a little too focused on playing footsie to really have it come across. But
because all these stories are leading him on in a way. I mean, you go back to the story about the rich guy, the noble guy, right? And in a way, Nicholas Earth is probably going, oh, is this guy telling me that he's going to die soon and give me all his money?
Right.
You know, am I the chosen one? Am I the special dude? Is he going to give me all this? Like, did he see me as a sensitive young man?
Right,
and I'm gonna,
right.
You know, I'm going to be like put in his will when he dies. You know, I don't care if this money comes from Belgian Congo slaves. You know, like I'm like, I'll take it. You know, because.
Dude, and as a person reading it, I gotta say, if I was in Nicholas Earp's shoes, I can't say that thought would not occur to me. Like, maybe this lonely old man will just give me all of his money. Like, you know,
in his art and his cool stuff.
I'm not going to push him down the stairs to make it happen, but maybe if I'm his buddy for the summer, like, you never know.
Right, maybe if I prove myself, right, by being smart and intelligent, and then I also get the girl. I get Prospero's daughter. What's the character? What's the Prospero's daughter's name?
Oh gosh, I can't remember. I wouldn't be surprised if it's similar to something in this story, actually.
And then because you have Caliban, right? Caliban is the Caliban's like the monster, right? Right. And Prospero's daughter, who is imprisoned in Miranda, right?
Okay.
And she even Lily reads a part of The Tempest at one point, like, you know, and then there's a spirit, Ariel, which is the spirit of the water. There's a lot of water. You know, I was thinking while we were talking, and I think I want to get your opinion. Would you say that this book is Lynchian in its vibes?
It definitely has Lynchian moments for sure. Like one of the most Lynchian moments is there's a moment, and it's not one I really took notes on, but I'm remembering it now. There's a moment where Conscious takes Nicholas to look at a stone head that he has, and just like kind of like forces Nicholas to stare it in the eyes. Do you remember this?
Yeah,
And it's
yeah.
like, yeah, and I don't know even exactly what he was trying to get Nicholas. I mean, it was part of this sort of destabilization, breaking down process, but that part felt really Lynchian to me. You're just out there with this like odd dude who's like, you have to look in the eyes of this statue head. Like it felt like a very that felt like a very Lynchian thing for sure.
Well, you know, one thing in Lynchian work, and obviously Lynch wrote his movies and stuff 20, 30 years after this book was written, but is so influential that we can post hoc add it to, you know, work from before. Is Lynch had this weird obsession. It feels Lynchian because it does two things that David Lynch does in a lot of his movies, right? One thing is it's like the meme of there's a blonde girl, but there's also a brunette who might be the same person, and you get that in get that kind of dichotomy in Twin Peaks. You get that dichotomy in Mulholland Drive very well, where it's like there's a blonde girl, but there's a brunette also, you know?
Right,
and are they the same person? Are they not the same person? Are they this, you know what I mean? You get that kind of like, one is kind of, and you get that in Lost Highway, where she's blonde at one point, but then she's a brunette in the next point, and it's the same person, or is it the same person, you know? Right. And you get that kind of game with the blonde, you know, you got Allison, she's the normal kind of Australian girl, but then you get Lily, but then you get her twin, and are they twins? Are they even related? Are they the same person? You never know, right? Because you never see them at the same time, so you're like, and then in a way, like the manor, the villa, right, that he goes to is very much like the lodge, right? The waiting room is like I can see there's this whole checkered pattern vibe to it, where he goes and enters into like the lodge, like the wizard's lodge in a way, where it's like, is what's going on real? Is it not real? Is it like an alternate universe? Is anything this dude's telling me real? Is it, you know what I mean? Like it's constantly weirdness and then it's very well, one thing that the book does, and I don't think we've mentioned it very much, is that in between all these episodes where Nicholas goes to Conscious's mansion or villa or whatever he calls it, there's a name for it's called Burano or something like that, right?
Burani, which apparently translates to water and skull.
Oh, yeah. Right. So he goes to Burani, the creepy, the Black Lodge of this island. And in the book, every one of these episodes that all this kind of crazy stuff happens, there's like 4 chapters in between where Nicholas just goes back to teaching school. Right. And it's absolutely boring. You know, it's normal, mundane. None of the locals know what the hell's going on. None of them and he becomes obsessed with, do the locals know what's going on? Are they in on it? You know? Right. And stuff starts to leak out from that world into his mundane world, where he's walking down the street and he sees an old, noble-looking gentleman walking down the street. And he goes talk to the guy, and the guy's like, I don't know what you're talking about, dude. You know, like, I don't know. It's weird, you know? Yeah. And he sees characters from these kind of plays that Conscious is putting on for him, walking around the little village town he lives in. But he's like, are they connected? Is there this huge conspiracy? Is everybody on the island against me in a way? Is everybody like messing with me? So he kind of goes insane in these moments of mundanity that are interspersed by these exciting episodes where you, the reader, are almost waiting. Like, okay, come on, teach these kids, get them over with, go back. Get Saturday. It's Saturday. Go back to the freaking Skull Island mansion so you can get the next episode of Crazy Time. And he sits there obsessing about it. Do you want to talk about him going to Greece with his girlfriend?
Yeah, I think that's an important. It's a beautiful chapter, or a couple of chapters, or whatever, but it's also super important to the whole thing. So he's had these letters from Allison periodically. They're sort of on the outs, I guess, but she's an air hostess and she's traveling around, and she's going to have a few days in Athens. And I think she writes a letter to, come meet him. And I think that Maurice is even encouraging him to do this. And there's like sometimes Maurice knows more about what's going on in Nicholas's like life off of Barani than he should, and there's always like a wait, how do you how do you know
Yeah,
what's
are you
going
reading
on
my
with
letters?
that?
Right. It's this
Right.
paranoia about the village. He's like, is everybody
Yeah.
opening my letters and stuff?
Right. And so Nicholas does go to Athens, and then he meets up with Allison, and of course, you know, I think it's been like 9 months or something has gone by, so it's not the same, but it's really a beautiful scene. Like Fowles did an amazing job of conveying her. Like you kind of, I don't know. I was reading it, and especially in that chapter, that set of chapters, I was feeling a tremendous fondness for Allison. I was like, I really like her.
Well,
You know?
I will add a quick note. He loves that
Yeah.
character because that character is based on his wife.
Is that right?
It is his wife, and his wife was he if you John Fowles, he got married to his wife Elizabeth Fowles, and they stayed married throughout their entire life. And she was his first reader, his editor. She did everything for him, and he was kind of a useless kind of guy. He was one of these. He was kind of the sensitive young man. He didn't know how to drive, so she drove him all over Europe. She did everything for him, and he was super faithful to her to the point where at one point when his movie was his first novel, The Collector, was made into a movie, he goes to Los Angeles, and everybody's like, "Oh, you're gonna pick up all these girls now? You're like a big movie writer guy, you know?" And he's like, "No." He's like, people would make fun of him because he wasn't this libertine kind of guy. He was a devoted. He stayed fully devoted to her until she passed away in the 90s. And after that, 5 years later, he gets married to his secretary that was like kind of his assistant, and he stays with her for the last few years of his life. But no, Elizabeth was what the book was, what Allison was based on. And it's interesting because if you read his biography, which is really good, actually, it's very interesting if you're into the life of writers. This is the real woman, Elizabeth. She kind of had a moment of crises when he was writing this book, and she was kind of editing it and like suggesting things as they went along, because she saw herself so much in this character that she kind of lost her own identity. She's like, what am I? Am I just a writer's wife? I'm just his editor? What's going, you know what I mean? And it's interesting that, and the dynamic between them is John Fowles himself went to Oxford, and he was an upper middle class guy, and she was lower class, right? She was very much like Allison in the book, where she was not so much this highly intellectual, educated woman, but she was brilliant because she edited this book, and she, rewrote scenes for him and stuff, and he fully depended on her. But that's the kind of dynamic where they had, and so much so that, like, she was kind of troublesome in a way, because she was married before, and she had a daughter from a previous marriage, and he kind of stole her away, and there was a lot of like a class drama. You can imagine 1940s and 50s England. You don't get divorced, right? And you don't remarry with a child, and all this kind of drama. And especially in like upper class or kind of intellectual circles, it was kind of frowned upon. And so there's some interesting dynamics between Nicholas and the writer, and Allison and his wife in real life, that kind of come out really well in this scene when he goes to Athens with her.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. That's good to know, and that does help explain why it's sort of so, the relation, not only her as a character, but the relationship dynamics are so well conveyed, and they come together, and it's sort of awkward, and she's being at times like a little bit performative, because I think she's trying. There's one point where there's like a small child who has a boil on her shoulder that they kind of encounter in the street, and Allison like tries to take care of the child, and Nick sees this as her performing to be a mother, and there's this beautiful kind of moment where she's like, yeah, maybe I was performing as a mother, but that's because I want to have your kids, you asshole. Like, you know what I mean? There's this beautiful sort of this wonderful just back and forth, but they end up climbing. What is it? What is the name of that mountain? Mount Parnassus? No, that's not right.
Parnassus.
Parnassus. I was thinking of a place in France, and I was like, that's not right. Yeah, they climb Parnassus, and it ends up being a sort of a hell hike. They end up, suffering like mountain weather and having to shelter in this cabin. And he's part of his problem is, and he does this later in the book with another character too, and we probably won't spend too much time talking about that, but he does this thing where, like, I think in his head, Nicholas's head, he's like, he's obsessed with Lily back on the island, who he hasn't sort of consummated the relationship with, and he's sort of convinced himself that spending this time with Allison is like, he's sort of obligated to do it, but he's not doing it because he wants to exactly. And then he sort of gets himself out of having sex with her by talking about the fact that he'd had syphilis from a brothel. And even though that's completely healed, like that's been healed up for, like, that hasn't been an issue for months, but he's using this as like this excuse, because this is this thing that he does. It's like, it's like, well, if I don't have sex with her, then somehow, like, I don't know if he thinks it won't hurt, her feelings won't end up getting hurt or something, but like he's definitely not in, but he's sort of doing this little trip to as almost out of a sense of obligation. But it ends up being like one of those things where, like, I don't know, I think anybody who's been in I've been married for 5 years now, and I met my wife before that, obviously. And it's like, sometimes you have these, sometimes you plan like a little thing you're going to do, like a little weekend trip or whatever, and it's cool, but it's sort of uneventful. It's not particularly memorable. And then sometimes you go on one of these things and it ends up being like this core memory that you guys have, right? It's just sort of beautiful, and you're both in the right kind of headspace, and it all kind of just works out, and it's like the scenery's great or whatever. And so they end up having this, like, the perfectly romantic weekend together going up this mountain. It's kind of awesome. And then he sort of like breaks it to her that there's this woman on this island that he's obsessing over. And I mean, she ends up basically saying, fuck you, I hate you. Like,
and you suck in bed.
Yeah, and you suck in bed. That's right. That's a key. That's key, that he sucks in bed. Right. But it's like, that was one of these moments we're talking about, like, kind of knowing he's an asshole, but also like weirdly relating to him as a 22-year-old, 23-year-old man or whatever.
Because he wants her to do that. He goaded her basically into that. And, I look back at my own life, and, in our modern contemporary discourse of like incels and that kind of stuff, people will be like, oh, you if you get the girl, you better keep her or whatever, Right. But, I've had moments where I look back, and I think I've been married for almost 15 years now, actually. Yeah. I got married.
Nice.
A while now. And like, I met my wife when I was 28, but there's moments I look back, in my early 20s where I was dating women and with women that would have made great wives, you know what I mean? And I look back and I'm like, man, but at the time then I even knew, like, oh man, if I married her, we'd have a great relationship and they're probably going to have a good life, but it'd be a boring life, like, I would be stuck. I would not be, I would not grow up to be the famous podcaster I am today. You know what I mean? Or like, I haven't seen the world yet, right? Like I just, like, it wasn't like, I didn't see myself as the guy that was ready to like settle down. So I sabotaged his relationships, by, being Nicholas, basically being like, oh, I don't want to be here, or just being an asshole, or another girl talks to me, and so you dump your girlfriend because somebody that's more exciting, and that's what he did. Yeah. He thinks he loves Lily or whatever Lily, but Lily's not real. Right? Yeah, she might be a ghost. She might be a schizophrenic. She might be an actress.
Right. She's a real physical person, but this whole circumstance is completely contrived, and he kind of knows it. And he's as in love with like the mystery of the whole thing as he is with any person that might be there. Yeah.
And it's not like he like
Yes.
slept with her. He basically told her that he's in love with this weird fantasy that he's experiencing, you know? Because he
Hmm.
didn't not like, but when he went to Athens, he never like hooked up with Lily or any of her variations, you know? They're
Right.
just, he's basically in love with the idea of himself being in love with Lily, you know?
Right. Right.
And
Right. Right.
now
And
that I think
she
about it,
and go ahead.
well, now that I think about it, everything that Conscious tells him, every story, every play he puts on for him, everything is just, it's not about Conscious at all. It's just about Nicholas.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
everything. Nicholas is the main character in the entire play, basically. And they refer to it as a mask, right? But he's the only one that's not masked in a way. Like Conscious is showing him himself, his own like fantasies or how he sees himself, and he's basically making him go, I'm a phony. You know what I mean?
Right.
In a way, he's like the anti what's his name from The Catcher in the Rye. He's, you
Yeah,
know,
Holden Caulfield. Yeah, it's funny.
he's
I have Holden Caulfield in my notes. Like, how do we compare these two characters? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right,
Perfect.
because Nicholas is Holden Caulfield, but Conscious is basically going, no, no, fool, you're the phony. You're the phoniest of all of them. You know what I mean? You're the
Right.
fakest of all of them, and this is why. Like, here's all this stuff, you know? And it's fascinating that, you know, that's what he makes him, I guess, realize by the end, maybe. You know, it's kind of open-ended
Yeah.
whether he realizes it or not.
Yeah, yeah, no, and this is where I'm getting like, should we just maybe we're pretty deep into this. So if you're wanting to read this book and not have any spoilers at all, like I think we could talk about sort of the last bit of it here for people who
Yeah, I
have
think
read
we
the
can
Magus.
too.
Yeah, because the thing that happens with Allison sort of right after this, because the she's been sort of she's been pushed aside by Nicholas so he can follow this dream. The next thing that Nicholas hears about Allison is in a couple letters from friends of hers, and I think two news clippings. He hears that Allison has committed suicide, and and of course, I mean, he's a bit of an asshole, but he's not so much of an asshole that that he doesn't feel bad. You know what I mean? Like he's
Right.
he's like a normal dude. He's a normal 23-year-old dude, kind of arrogant or whatever, trying to figure it out. But he's not a sociopath, right? So he feels he feels terrible about this, but he's not really sure what to do with it. He doesn't want to tell Maurice about this, though of course Maurice already knows that this is the turn that has happened. And pretty quickly after Allison's quote unquote suicide, Maurice is like, yeah, we're almost at the end of our story here. I don't remember the exact sequencing there, but in another great story that Conscious tells, Conscious does explain what happened on the island during World War II, which is essentially it's kind of interesting. One thing I wanted to mention, it's funny that there's when Nicholas first gets to the island, he says this place has never been really haunted by fear, but only by like fantasy beasts and nymphs. And then you find out that no, it was actually occupied by the Nazis, and it was terrifying.
Right. Right.
Yeah, there was but not to rehash the whole thing, but Marie, that the whole Nazi thing on the island, Maurice gets kind of he gets sort of pulled into a leadership position on the island, and at one point he gets to make the choice to kill these two, I think it's two Greek guys from different islands who are the resistance fighters. They're saboteurs.
Partisans, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And he it's either the Conscious can either kill these two guys, or the Nazis are going to kill, I think, 80 people, I think is the number.
Right.
And Conscious is well, clearly the math is you got to kill these two guys. Obviously that's what you're supposed to do. But then the Nazis pull a fast one on him, which is apparently something that really happened. There's a book about a similar situation in Poland during World War II, where I think it was just like some normal police officers get kind of caught up in all of this. And so they give Conscious a gun to kill these two partisans, but it's not loaded. And it becomes clear that he's going to have to club these guys to death. That's what the Nazis want him to do, right? And you can imagine, having to shoot somebody and having to club them to death are two very different acts.
And the whole village is watching.
And the whole village is watching. Right, exactly. And it's a little bit ambiguous ultimately how it ends, but Conscious doesn't club these two guys to death. There's a firing squad. Conscious somehow survives. Supposedly, the story is that since that time, he's been like paying he's been paying off the families of people that were killed because of all of this. And it's this presentation of this like, the way that I read this was it was almost like the final lesson for Nicholas about how like a limited sense of rationality isn't going to be enough to get you through, because clearly the math is you club the two guys to death, right? That's the math. That's the reasonable thing to do. But whether or not you can actually, in the moment, actually do that is an entirely different question. And
which goes back to the cyanide pill.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very good point. And so that's kind of like Conscious's last big story, and from then on, it starts to take even more sort of twists and turns. I'm stuttering a little here because I'm not sure. I'm trying to think. So there is kind of a reveal nearer towards the end, but there's a few other steps. One thing I realized reading this book is like, it's not fair. So I read stuff mostly on my my e-reader now, just because it's I'm reading so much stuff for the podcast. It's just easier. I kind of wished I didn't know how many pages it was or how far I was into the book, because like there's stuff that'll happen and it's like page 300 and I'm like, oh well, there's way more of this book, but in my head it feels like it's almost over.
Right. And there's another twist and another twist.
Right. Where like I know something's gotta happen. But I guess kind of. Wait a second. Does he find out the real deal about Allison? No, he doesn't find that out till late, because there is this other reveal where they basically so Lily. Conscious leaves. Lily, there's a sort of all the people who are involved in the mask basically give Nicholas the sense that he's figured it all out, right? And Lily, the girl playing Lily, and Nicholas are like in love, sort of. Nicholas loves her, and she's sort of playing like they're going to be together after all of this. But then, just as they're sort of coming together, she's sort of kidnapped. But then there's this like back and forth thing, because she's kidnapped, she disappears. Then ultimately he goes back to the, I guess it's the hotel in the village, and she shows up. Is that how that works?
Yeah.
Something like that. And then or it's the other twin is at the hotel, and then they swap in the middle of the night. It's all very, as you can tell, it gets very kind of convoluted, intentionally so.
Right, because he thinks, oh, okay, I figured it out. This old kind of eccentric, he's just playing with me. He's going to give me his money when he dies or something like that.
Right,
and then,
right.
Then he just gets sinister.
It does get sinister, because in the midst of like before they even sleep together, ultimately the effect of the end of this is like he's gonna sleep with her. They're fooling around. It gets very physical, but she keeps like not letting it go to the next step. He starts getting frustrated, etc., etc., etc. And then all of a sudden, some of Conscious's men break in and inject him with a drug, and he passes out. And he wakes up. I think it might be a couple days later, even. Right. Yeah, it is a couple days later. He's on a different island. And they bring him into this cistern for first of all they put a very sort of sexual innuendo gag in his mouth.
Right. And then it turns into eyes wide shut.
It totally does. It gets so wild. There's that the one chapter near the end where basically it's sort of like the reveal, but it's to some degrees. I mean, this is the question I want to ask you: is okay. Let me just set it up. So Nicholas gets brought into this cistern that's been painted white, and there's a throne, and there's like some 8-spoked wheel and an ankh, and like there's all this weird symbology. They've got a gag in his mouth. There's weird ribbons on his arms. He doesn't really understand what's going to happen. Then there comes out a parade of people wearing different masks. There's like a dude in the Anubis mask. There's a dude who's dressed like a clown skeleton. There's Conscious, who's wearing like a magician's robe with alchemical symbols on it. There's a guy dressed like, what is it? It's Hyan or something, some kind of like English folklore hunter with like a stag head mask. It gets it's real freaking weird.
Right, he's like, I'm about to get butt raped for
Right.
sure. It's straight up like,
Right.
he's in the middle of like some Greek island. He's just been knocked out, and it's like the scene out of True Detective with the guys with the animal masks on. And he's gagged. He's ball gagged. Yeah, it's definitely terrifying.
Yeah, and then and as a reader, you're like, I don't know what this is going to be, and he doesn't know it either. But he's still trying to be Nick Earth is still trying to be kind of defiant. He's still trying to kind of play it off cool. Which, let me tell you, if you've got a gag in your mouth and you're tied down and you're in basically what is effectively a basement, and there are 20 people with masks on, you are not cool. There's no way.
Nobody cares that you went to Oxford, boy.
Right? Yeah, exactly. But then, and this is where the twists get even weirder. It's all like a cult, and they've got this tiny coffin that supposedly they believe has the unseen virgin goddess Astarte in it, or Ashtaroth, and like it's so like occult for like several pages. It's very occult, and it's like, what the I couldn't put it down. I mean, there's no way to put it down there because there's like, I have to understand what this is all about. But then they reveal that this has all been like a psychological experiment. And I say reveal, I should say reveal in quotes, because I'm still not even, I don't think that's even what they were doing yet.
Right.
But and that Vanessa, and now Lily, who is also Julie, is now Dr. Vanessa Maxwell. Apparently a bunch of people, the people that are in this group, including people who were that Nicholas had encountered as sort of cast members of The Mask, they're also, some of them are psychiatric doctors, but there's other people he's never seen before. And the one of my favorite bits in the book is when they read their psychiatric or psychological evaluation of Nicholas to him. It's so, I mean, see if I think I have a part of it right here. It's like, I don't know, 3 or 4 pages. It's totally spot on, but also just devastating. Like if someone were to bring you into a room and read this about you in a group of like 40 people, including a woman that you're kind of confused now, but you're sort of in love with her.
And they know that your girlfriend that you dumped killed herself, and
right. Yeah, there's a where's the thing? Yeah, okay, so refers to him as having semi-intellectual introversion, and that he's interesting only for the purposes of our study. They say his life lacks social content, that he has an only partially resolved Oedipal complex. He has an ambivalent attitude towards women, who he sees as objects of desire and of betrayal. He has an autoerotic approach to emotional problems. He has preyed sexually and emotionally on young women by stressing his loneliness and unhappiness, basically playing a little boy to like manipulate their motherly instincts. And he's intentionally placed himself in situations he cannot tolerate. I'm paraphrasing here. Basically, so he has a situation to complain about. It's just like, and it kind of goes on and on like this. And then there's this great bit. I'm going to just read this, and then I want to hear your thoughts on all this. There's this great part, and I'll just read this direct quote. As Dr. Conscious has observed in his article, The Mid-Century Predicament, now he's talking about Nicholas, quote, "The rebel with no specific gift for rebellion is destined to become the drone, and even the metaphor is inexact, since the drone has at least a small chance of fecundating the queen, whereas the human rebel drone is deprived even of that small chance and may finally see himself as totally sterile, lacking not only the brilliant life success of the queens, but even the humble satisfactions of the workers in the human hive. Such a personality is reduced to mere wax, a mere receiver of impressions, and this condition is the very negation of the basic drive in him, to rebel. It is no wonder that in middle age many such failed rebels turned self-conscious drones, aware of their susceptibility to intellectual vogues, adopt a mask of cynicism that cannot hide their more or less paranoid sense of having been betrayed by life."
Right. Burn.
I know, but it's also like, it's totally a burn, but it's also like, dude, people are living like, that's the 2025. You could, if that was written in 2025, I would be nodding my head that a lot of people are living like that. Yeah.
Because I mean that's what makes this novel so great. And I think this novel itself, I think we're gonna see this novel, and I hope to, and that's why I want to do this podcast and I want to talk about it on my podcast more, is because this novel really is, it was almost ahead of its time, right? Because Nicholas is, he's a unique individual for the 1950s and the 60s when the novel was written, but he is the man of today, you know?
Yeah.
We all see ourselves as these cool intellectual rebels that are smarter than everybody. You know, we're either we're woke, or we're woke and we're like progressive, or we're like anti-woke and we're dark elves and we're these dark elf dudes, you know what I mean? But then then we simp for people like Ayala and stuff, and it's like every dude, every poster on X right now sees himself as this like rational intellectual guy that has it all down together, and he's going to give you advice on everything from God to religion to whatever, and really you're just a bunch of antisocial losers. That's really what you are. It's like you're a bunch of antisocial loser simps, who think of yourself as these intellectual powerhouses, but really you're just a chump. And what's great about it, the whole, because when I first read it, I was like, I liked the occult thing, right? I digged it. I mean, that's something I'm into, right? You and I have talked about it before. I like the whole occult symbology of it and everything, right? But then in a way, and I kind of like I kind of bristled at when it was revealed fakely, in my opinion, right? I don't think they really are scientists either, right? No. That's his vulnerability, right? Because if it was just this weird occult ritual that this rich guy and a bunch of weird perverts are putting on, right? Nicholas could have rationalized it away as like, well, I'm not that. I reject their occult perversions, Right. But they come at him through his weakness, which is rational materialism, Like, he's not just a chump for falling for the occult stuff. He's a chump because he's psychiatrically deficient by his own standards, which is rational scientific thinking. So that's how they tear him down. They tore him down through the mythology, but then they tear him down through, and what is science? What is a magician but a scientist, right? If you ever read the early Enlightenment guys, a lot of these guys, the what we consider these men of science from the Enlightenment, all their stuff is intertwined with occultism. It's it goes hand in hand, right? Alchemy, and all the magician stuff from the early modern era. Those guys didn't see themselves as wizards. They saw themselves, they were scientists, they meant to control nature, right? And this is exactly what Conscious is doing. He's controlling the base of nature, which is the psychological, wavelength in a way. And it slaps Nicholas across the face. It basically just makes him retarded. And then they show him porn.
Right? Well, porn, they show him, but porn with the woman he was just in love with. Right. Yeah. Which is just, that's like, you're just going to like that. If you want to like completely break somebody's brain, that does seem like to be like the next step, because you're right, you mentioned earlier we're breaking them down. We're breaking them down at every single level. The psychological stuff was like, hey, I know we've talked to you, maybe you're a psychic, maybe you're this, you're flattered, you're this, your girlfriend killed herself and it's your fault, but also we scanned you and it turns out you're deficient. Oh, and also that woman you just loved, we're gonna have like we're gonna have basically porn. Also, I think there's some race stuff going on here. I don't think that's reaching too far. It's like a big masculine black dude that's fucking Lily / Vanessa, which is also playing on the class and race stuff that's going on in Nicholas's head. And it's like, yeah, by that time you are stripped down to nothing. Nicholas doesn't have anything left.
He's a super cuck, right? He's a super incel cuck. And it was they show him a porno home movie, which is very like artistic in a very snuff porn kind of way. Then they show him actual like video of him and Allison like in Athens.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Which tells him like, even your regular life, we were there. You know what I mean? We saw everything, like we were intimately in your life. And then they show him a live sex show of the girl he's been in love with sleeping with the big tall black dude who was also the satyr earlier on during the the little one of the crazy play happenings, so he's just wrecked. He's done. Right. And then they dump him in some hotel room with a gun. They give him a gun.
Yes.
And they're like,
yeah. Well, and this is where it gets to be the incredible moment, because he has a moment where, oh my God, I think I actually have the quote here. There's a moment where it's like, he hates them. He's so mad about all of this happening. But then there is this moment where he feels like this, where is it? Quote, and this is after they've dumped him off and he's apparently like liberated. They left him with a gun and a little bit of cash on some other island. They gave him instructions where he can go catch the boat to Phraxos. And he says this, talking about sort of his feelings in this moment. And he had shot the gun in the air, and it's very much reminiscent, and basically emptied the rounds into the air. It's reminiscent of him early in the book almost committing suicide on the island by, he took this rifle out and he shot that rifle in the air. But in this case, it's not like some kind of suicidal desperation to the state of his life or whatever. He says he has this feeling, quote, I had this, being obscurely victorious, being free again, but in a new freedom, purged in some way, as if they had miscalculated. And what I love about this is that it's like, on one level, everything that Maurice Conscious and the whole crew were up to has somehow been successful because he has this feeling of freedom. So like, maybe that's what Conscious was trying to accomplish all this time. But then Nicholas is still so sort of in his own head that he says, I felt this way despite them, as if they'd made some miscalculation. And it's like, dude, how do you not think that this is what they were trying to do to you?
He's still arrogant. He's like, oh, no.
Right.
I'll show them. Right. I'll go back on X and post.
Right.
I'll go back.
Right, exactly.
So he goes back to the island, and he gets fired from the school.
Right. He decks some guy too. He punches one of the guys because he's like, you were in on this, but he hasn't been doing any. He hasn't been a very good teacher anyway, so he shouldn't have been.
And they're
teaching.
like, we're firing you because you sucked as a teacher, dude. You've been disappearing for days at a time and not doing any. You're grading or anything. You're kind of a shitty teacher.
Right.
So he's like, yeah, I guess you're right.
I guess you're right.
And he goes back to the estate and it's empty. It's all gone. Everything's gone. There's no furniture. There's nothing. All he finds is like costumes and like a notebook that like has like the whole plan outlined, and it's obviously left there on purpose, and just to kind of mock him in a way. And he's just like, I don't know what to do with my life anymore.
Right. Now, so then does he go back? Now, this is when he begins a sort of investigatory process, right? Because it's like
Right.
he's still not sure exactly what to believe and what not to believe. But so he's like, at one point he decides that one of the ways that they've been sort of, just back up for a second, he had done some investigation earlier when he thought he found out Lily's and her twin sister's real name, and he'd received some letters from people and some news clippings that suggested to him that there was some truth to the story, that there were these actresses that had been hired by Conscious. But now that Lily was in the occult thing, Lily was a Dr. Vanessa Maxwell who was like just clinically evaluating him. So he's all twisted and turned, and he begins to pursue trying to further validate aspects of this story. It's interesting because he has this. The one thing about him is he has this sort of like, he has this resentment about the situation. But do you remember the part where the guy who's supposed to take his position, he meets with him in London towards the end? Yeah. And so this would be the time, if you really hate what Maurice Conscious did to you, this would be the time where you'd be like, dude, do not go to that island. Like, don't play the like, oh, beware the waiting room. Like, literally be like, listen, if you go there, they're going to screw up your life. They're going to destroy you. And instead, he doesn't. Instead, Nick's like, yeah, have fun. Like, he just
go there, dude. It's a great
just go.
spot.
Yeah, which is just indicative of like, this is still where like Nicholas still doesn't quite know what he believes or feels, Because like he can he can think about this thing sort of out of both sides of his mouth, think it's this terrible thing that happened, but also like somehow it's super special and shouldn't be corrupted in some way. Yeah.
Well, and I think here is where you start having a lot of like breakdown where people like the book or don't like the book, because he goes on this long trek through England to try to figure out what's going on, and he sort of kind of figures it out, or at least what he thinks is the right thing. And here's where the main spoiler. So this is the spoiler alert, right? He finds out that Allison is not dead.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And he finds out that she was also in on the whole thing to a certain degree, or maybe not, or he thinks. And he ends up living with this other girl for a while, which is like this really weird kind of like manic pixie dream girl kind of character,
right?
Which he also does.
He does that. Yeah, he does that thing where like, well, we'll just be buddies, and I won't sleep with you. And then she falls in love with him, and he's like, wait, why are your feelings hurt? Like,
right. And then he he realizes that, you know what, I actually love Allison the whole time.
Right.
Or does he?
Right. Or does he?
Or maybe.
This is what's so weird. So like at the end, I have like ultimately two questions, and this isn't because so he's confronted. Allison just shows up at this coffee shop, and he has to like deal with her. And there's a couple of things here that I found interesting. Like, one is when they broke up basically at the foot of Mount Parnassus before she quote unquote committed suicide, he told her, like, listen, one day I might come crawling back to you, and when I do, you should take, I understand if you want to take out the ultimate revenge on me, right? Like, and then she does this fake suicide thing, and to him it's this level of betrayal that's unimaginable. And it's just an interesting like contradiction, right? It's just like he doesn't seem to have any sense of like, yeah, well, you betrayed her too, right? Like there's like no sense of like fair play or whatever. So that is interesting, which makes me think like, how much did Nicholas really change or grow in this process? But then the other question is like, when did Allison get involved? Like, when do you think she got involved?
I think it probably after the breakup.
Okay.
That's probably like, to me, like that seems like the logical, because they were following them around.
Right. So
And
that would mean that like Maurice came to her or whoever with a bunch of money and were like, "Hey, let's do this."
right, like get
Yeah.
him back, let's
Yeah.
get him back. We're fucking with him or whatever. We're teaching him a lesson, whatever he sold her, which we never know. That's the kind of the cool part of the book, is that you never really know exactly like where she comes in or like where, and another thing is you don't know what happens between them at the end. It doesn't tie it up at all. And
Right.
there's a great scene in the end where they're going to meet in the park in front of the Playhouse in London, right? Like the famous Playhouse. And he's convinced that they're watching, because, he's living in paranoid land now. He's like everything, he's been kind of going around.
And fair enough.
Right. Fair enough. Right. Yeah. And during their little like interaction, he realizes that nobody's watching. They've moved on. They don't care about me anymore.
Right.
This is it. Like there is nobody watching me. There is no going back to the island. I'm never going to see these people again. It's like, that was it. This is done. Like everything's over, and you can think back. There was a scene early on when he's sitting with Lily on the beach or something, and she reads his palm.
Yeah.
And she tells him like, you're going to be boring and happy. Basically, you're going to get married and be boring and happy. And I think he thinks back to that, and he's like, that was it. Like I'm not the man that's going to drink the wave. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like I think he realizes there that he's like, I am not conscious. I'm not Apollo. I'm not, the satyr. I'm none of those things. I am a boring dude that is going to probably marry Allison and become boring like my dad. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like I'm not a rebel.
We'll have a couple kids. I'll have a kind of boring job. She'll do air hostess for a little while until we have some kids, and we'll settle down in a very middle class house somewhere. Yeah.
Right. I'm not Lord Byron. I'm not, because Lord Byron, unlike Lord Byron, Nicholas came back from Greece.
Right.
Right. He comes back from Greece. Lord Byron did not come back from Greece, and he died during the Greek Revolution against the Turks.
That's right. I didn't think about that. Yeah, that's interesting.
Right. So it's interesting because it's like he was basically revealed a world that he can take, which is, in a way very similar to Eyes Wide Shut. Have you seen that movie?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Well, in a way, Nicholas is very much like Tom Cruise's character in that, where, he also obsesses about, his wife, like his wife cheating, his wife, blah, blah, blah. And his whole, the whole like driving factor behind that movie, or the inciting incident, right, is that his wife admits that she would have banged the Navy officer guy that like hit on her or whatever, and he felt kind of cucked sexually. So he decided that he's this cool doctor, and he's good enough to be in with the cool boys, right, like the creepy Eyes Wide Shut crew. And he's going around like following the rainbow and all this stuff. And once again, there's two girls, right, in that scene. There's two women. There's always two of them, right, because that's it's lust and desire, right? Like these sirens basically. And he, towards the end of that movie, Tom Cruise's character, the doctor, realizes that he's nothing but a peasant to these people, right? He is a nobody. He is a boring ass doctor, and he needs to go back to his wife, and all these fantasies of liberation and feminism and libertineness are just illusions that he would not like if he actually tasted of them,
Right.
And so that's like I guess that's what I saw of it. He went to the end of the rainbow, and it was not for him because he was never meant to be there. He's supposed to leave it alone. In the same way Conscious left the crazy guy on the peninsula alone. He's like, no, he's talking to God is beyond me, you know?
Yeah,
Nicholas
yeah.
has to just let it be, which is like how we are. It's like we will brush against the wall, like, you know, the permeable wall of mystery, but it's not for us. You know what I mean? It's not,
Yeah. Yeah, you can't be
you know,
living out on that edge forever, and you know, there maybe is some value in testing that limit a little bit when you're young, especially, I guess, but ultimately
right,
like ultimately like what's the real, you know, the thing is, it's like, yeah, you're not going to be able to live out in that space. You're not going to be able to live out in some like magical, seductive, mythological mask your entire life.
right,
But how do you then like find some level of satisfaction in the more stable place that you're going to have to like go back to? And you're going to have to be like capable of, you know, this is what's interesting about the really, you know, I think the assumption is that he and Allison end up together, though it isn't on the page. And there is this sort of thing where, like, I think, see, I went back and forth because Nicholas, like, sets up this situation for Allison where, like, he sets up this mini play for them to put on for for Maurice and whoever might be watching, right? And it involves like him retreating and her pursuing him, and then him turning around and slapping her, and
right.
right? Like, and it's a little micro version of the mask that Conscious has been playing, and I don't know if I think he's sort of trying to show them like that he's trying to like get what he wants, but also not have let them win in a way, you know, like so. But I think ultimately like the takeaway is like, you know, I kind of assume that they're gonna come together, and you know, I think the kind of the cool thing is like he did. I mean, I was starting to think like if I was in this situation that Nicholas was in, right? Like, you know, we talked about how like we kind of resonate, our younger selves kind of resonate with what Nicholas Earth is up to some degree, but like you imagine yourself in this situation with Conscious and all this stuff. I don't know how differently I would have behaved than Nicholas, really. I think I
Right.
would have done a lot of the same things. I think I would have been seduced by the mystery of it. I would have been seduced by Conscious's like sophistication, especially in that context. To be like, I would have wanted that guy to think I was cool and smart. I would have fallen for Lily. Like, you know what I mean? Like all of this
But
stuff.
easily,
Yeah. Yeah.
because in a way, a book like this, right? And maybe why it bounces off some people is that ultimately a book like this is written for people like me and you in a way, because I'm going to presume that you and I are very similar based on our interest, right? You know, we consider ourselves a little bit intellectual, we're well read, we have a love for mystery and the occult. You probably like goth girls growing up like I did, you know, and you know, you saw yourself as the guy at the party. Those guys they're watching football. I'm going to go read
Right.
Byron over here in the corner, you know, like those
Right.
peasants, you know, like that was me. I mean, like I was those guys, you know, and the book ends with a line in Latin, right? And
Yes.
translated says, I'm not going to pronounce Latin because I'm horrible at it, but the line translates to tomorrow let him love who has never loved. He who has loved, let him love tomorrow. You know, so
Yeah.
maybe that's the clue. Maybe that's, you know, what it means, right? Like maybe he does get back with Allison, you know, maybe he doesn't. Maybe he realizes that he ruined, you know, by his you know, his mommy issues and daddy issues, he ruined, you know, the love of his life, and he needs to not be himself for a bit, you know, go rediscover, you know, maybe
Right.
go live in Norway in a farm or something. But it is kind of open ended because in a way you the reader are Nicholas, you know,
Right.
like if like if you've stuck with the book, you are somewhat Nicholas, you know, you basically like identify with him, and that's the line for you, right? Like you've done all this, you're just kind of a chump, you're not this, you know, you've just been torn down, you know, and this is where the
Right.
meta postmodernism of this book comes in, right? It's like the book is talking to you directly, like, bro, you're not that cool, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like
Right. Right.
you are just, you think you're cool because you went to Oxford, or you read all the books and you posted all the tweets, and you won all the arguments. You're not Apollo. Okay, you're not a Bronze Age god. Like, you're just a dude who needs to get married and have a normal life, because you can't handle that kind of stuff.
So maybe if you can learn how to, it sounds so cheesy, but I'm going to say it. Maybe if you can learn how to actually love another person, then maybe you can have like a life worth living, sort of, right?
Right.
Like,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, put away your materialism and your metamaterialism, and get rid of all that intellectualism, and go, no, I just want to love somebody,
Right.
Everything he did in Athens with Allison was cooler than what he did on the island.
Yes, exactly. And they did it together. It wasn't just happening to him. It wasn't being brought to him and presented to him and catered to him. It was them actually doing it together.
It was real, the storm, everything. It was real, and he ignored it because he was a tool, basically. You know what I mean? Like, not he was a young man, but like, I think that's the message, and whether John Fowles intended it to be that or whatever. But I think we covered it all, man. Actually, for listeners, just because we did kind of spoiler it a little bit, trust me, we didn't spoiler it. All right, there's so much more that's left out about the investigation at the end, and he figures out a lot of stuff. Which, once again, it's not a book that's going to end with a, and like I said, a lot of people like finite explanations, and it's not like that at all. You're not going to get answers, right? You never find out what happens to any of the characters, and that's a good thing. Okay, that's what makes the novel good, because it allows us to talk about it 50 years after it's written. And I think a lot more, because I have a feeling that this novel is going to have a resurgence, because his work is so good, and it's been kind of neglected in the last 30 years or so. And I think that it is a book that really speaks to us right now, and it's a book that really speaks to a subset of young man and older man like us, from a perspective that, like, you don't see a lot in contemporary literature. And I hope that we return to this kind of writing in the future.
Amen. Yeah, let's make the MAGUS, like, these books come and go in trends, so I wouldn't be surprised at all if it comes back. So, and I hope it does. I think we hit it all pretty, as much as we could. We could talk for another 6 hours, but we'd be, but I don't think there's a point. I think we brought it to a nice conclusion. Alex, thank you so much for doing this with me. I really, really appreciate it. I can't do this stuff without having smart, thoughtful people willing to go on the ride. And I really appreciate your insights. Talking to you has helped me understand this book even more. So I really do appreciate this conversation. And I think the audience is going to dig it too. So
absolutely. But before I wanted to add one more thing.
Sure.
So we talked about his other books. Right.
Yes.
His other books are actually very good also. And there's 2 other books of his I recommend. I mean, I think The French Lieutenant's Woman is really good. It's very meta-modern, and it plays with like time, just like the MAGUS does.
Cool.
But he has a novel called The Maggot, right? Which is very interesting.
I saw that title. Yeah.
It is truly one of the weirdest science fiction mixed with medieval. Like, it's a medieval science fiction novel where all kinds of science fiction stuff is happening, and it's a novel written in epistolary form. I never pronounce that right. Where you're getting letters and reports, and everything is written from a medieval kind of perspective, but science fiction stuff is happening, and you, the reader, can figure it out, but the characters cannot, because they're living in a very late medieval, high Middle Ages kind of mindset. So it's very trippy, because there's aliens and shit coming out of nowhere. And
that sounds awesome. That sounds awesome.
But, it's really good. It's a shorter novel too, so it's his last novel he wrote before he passed away. And also in the what's it called? The Ebony Tower, which is kind of a collection of. It's a short story collection, but they're actually novellas. Mm-hmm. There is the title story, right? Is the Ebony Tower, is actually this book rewritten in a short story format, but it has very similar themes where it's a married man, but it's written from like an older perspective, if that makes sense.
That's cool.
It's a married man goes to France, and he is basically a author, and he's a know-it-all kind of Oxford, smart guy, and he goes to interview this modernist painter that kind of like disappeared out of the art scene, and he like bought it. He's going there to write an art book on him, and he gets there, and the dude is very conscious. Like, he has these two young women living with him, and they're like, there's a lot of like ambiguity of what's going on with these two young women, and the main character, kind of falls in love with one of them, but he also kind of falls in love with the other one, and it's like the blonde and the brunette David Lynch thing going on. Meanwhile, the old man is watching him. It's very the same kind of themes, but from an older kind of perspective, and also messes around with the whole Greek mythology kind of concept, because one of the characters is named Diana, and it's that whole thing. So
that sounds great.
It's definitely worth reading as like a codex to this book. So it's well worth it. I love
that. Yeah.
Thank you for having me on, man.
Of course, it. Yeah. And folks listening, the madness portion of this is going to be coming out soon. I'm going to talk about the magus, the symbology of the magician. I'm going to be talking about Antonin Artaud's Theater of Cruelty. I'm going to be talking about the ridiculous 1960s spy thriller TV show, The Prisoner, all kind of in relation to the magus. So stay, if you're willing and able and want to chuck me a couple bucks a month to be able to listen to those, please do. I appreciate your support. In fact, I just bought this new microphone with your support, so thank you so much. And definitely listen to Black Ibis Social Club. Alex, do you want to talk about anything you got coming up soon, or give promos? I'll obviously have links to your stuff in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Black Ibis Social Club is my podcast that I run with the very esteemed Fisto Sobani. And the way I conceptualized it about 2 years ago was that I wanted to recreate the conversations I used to have as a young, sensitive man like Nicholas Earf, sitting around a coffee shop, pontificating intellectually about topics well beyond my understanding. And because, I live far away from all my friends now, and, so I started a weekly. So it's a mix of salon with coffee shop conversation, and basically every week, it's like a radio talk show. We're actually going to switch to doing it live pretty soon.
Oh, cool.
And I'm going to try the live episode for the first time tomorrow, if everything works out well. But the idea is that we bring in a guest, or we don't have a guest. It depends on what mood I'm in or whoever's available. Sure. And we talk about some current events, things that I find interesting, novels I like. We brought a lot of authors on. We brought, you were a guest, and you were one of my favorite guests.
That was great.
And we don't really have a script. We just kind of talk about, whatever topics pop into my mind. So you'll get one day, you'll get an episode about Orthodox Christianity, and the next episode will be about David Lynch movies, and my dogs are usually part of the show because they bust in and they bark in the background. And we talk about education, and it's all from kind of an esoteric, kind of outside the mainstream kind of perspective. That's because that's who I am. Now I'm starting to doubt that. I feel like Nicholas a little bit, where I'm going to have conscious tear me down with a psychological analysis. But it's definitely fun. We do different episodes. Our next episode, we're going to watch my favorite movie, The Great Beauty, which is a fantastic movie. If you've never seen it, we're just going to talk about that for a while.
Yeah, I heard you mention that on a recent episode, and I've never even heard of it. So it's going on my list for sure. Yeah.
It's a wonderful Italian movie from 2010, a beautiful movie. I'm kind of like it. That movie is kind of like I constantly promote two things: that movie and this book.
Yeah,
so this week. Like, you inviting me and having the schedule today was basically what kind of inspired me to do that episode on that movie, because that's my two favorite things. I'm like, John Fowles and The Great Beauty, two things that are very similar.
Hey man, this is part of doing the whole podcast game. I feel like is just getting other people like interested in the same stuff you're interested in, you know, like bringing it back to life and pointing at it and telling people like, hey, this is cool.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you spent many years over on, you know, doing the Art of Darkness, and there's so many novels I've read because of you guys on that show.
that's
You know,
awesome.
and
Yeah.
you know, funny enough, every single novel you've covered on this show, I've actually read. So I've like, you know,
Nice.
like, it's like you've like predicted me basically. You guys did Moby Dick, and I was like, well, I just read Moby Dick for the first time,
Right.
so I was right on top of it, you know.
Right.
But what's interesting is the coolest thing I've noticed, and I'm sure you've noticed this too, because if I noticed it, you've noticed it because you've been doing it longer than I have, is I love it when like guests I've had on the show or books I've talked about become kind of the topic of like culture, at least our culture, like 6-7 months later. I'm like, oh, I love that. You know,
something pops up and you're like, no, and it does happen often enough where it's pretty exciting, and not in like even like in a arrogant way, just like, oh, I'm participating, like like
right, I'm part of it.
Yeah,
I mean, come on, Rolling Stone magazine mentioned Nutcracker under the article.
That was wild, dude. Like,
well, that's your boy right there. That's her boy.
I know. What an interesting moment. Yeah. It took me a while. I was texting somebody about that you know kind of knows those people, and he said, "Hey, didn't you blurb Nutcracker?" And I was like, "Yeah, actually, I did." So then I kind of realized like I'm like a tiny little sentence that just out of focus in that picture. So that's kind of cool. That's fun.
We're doing our own mask. We're putting on our own mask for the world. All right,
exactly.
through podcasts. We're basically conscious, basically.
That's
okay?
right. Yeah, basically.
Maurice conscious.
Yeah. I'm just certainly not Nicholas Earth, so I don't know who. All right, Alex.
Yeah,
Thanks,
once
man.
again, man, thank you so much for having me on. This is a great conversation to talk about my favorite book.
Yeah, amen. Yeah, thanks for your time. We'll talk soon. Bye, everybody.